We do have quorum, so let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Toronto Transit Commission Board Meeting number 2019. We had our confidential session this morning at 10 and now are in our public session. There were no declarations of interest when we began our meeting this morning declared, and the minutes of the previous meeting were passed this morning before we went into camera. We have a relatively short agenda today. I think most of the items either have deputants on them or we will hold, but we will do the standard run through of the agenda to see what we might be able to knock off. We'll hold the CEO's report under my name because I know there's some details the CEO wants to provide. Similarly, I will hold the ACAT minutes. Item number 3 was a Toronto York Spadina subway extension claim settlement update, largely dealt with in Committee of the Whole. Could I have someone move the actions taken in camera? Moved by Commissioner Campbell. All in favor? That carries. Thank you. Item number 4 was the 455 Gordon Baker Road property. Similarly, if someone who was in the in-camera session can move that. Commissioner Mihevik will move the recommendations and actions taken in camera. All in favor? No opposed. That carries. Item number 5 was general banking resolution. The actions taken in camera will be moved by Vice Chair Heisey. All in favor? That carries. Item number 6, I believe we have some deputants on. Similarly, we have someone for number 7. Item number 8. Is that something commissioners need held? Moved by Commissioner, staff recommendations are moved by Commissioner Fragadakis. All in favor? Opposed? None. That carries. Item number 9, purchasing cards. Staff recommendations moved by Commissioner Fragadakis. All in favor? No opposed. That carries. With the supplementary agenda, we added item number 10, which we'll call Pioneer Village Art Installation. I know we have to motion on that, and I'm assuming people might have questions, so we'll hold that one for now. One other just housekeeping item before we get to item number 1 in the CEO's report is I know we have a deputant list, and for item number 6, we have 4 people on it, and there was a request to add from TTC riders that came in just a little bit late to add them as a deputant. So I'll move that we add them to the list. All in favor? That carries. Thank you very much. And we'll announce the names of the people on that list as we get closer to that item. We'll start with item number 1 and notable CEO's report, because we have with us our newly appointed acting CEO and deputy. So over to you, Mr. Leary.
Thank you, Chair. Before I get started on the CEO's report, though, what I'd like to do is make sure that the entire board's aware of a decision that was made, and that was to ask Kirsten Watson, sitting beside me, to assume the role as the acting deputy CEO of the TTC. And I'd just like to give you a little bit about Kirsten's background as well. Kirsten's a career employee who's been with the TTC for about 17 years with a little broken service. She started in human resources as the director of employee relations and later becoming the senior director of human resources. In somewhat of a bold move at the time, Kirsten changed her career path and went over to manage the Bloor Danforth subway as well as the SRT line. An opportunity came for Kirsten to move on to the Ministry of Labor, where she was the Deputy Director of Dispute Resolution Services, and then later the Director. Fortunate for the TTC, they were able to persuade Kirsten to return, where she was the Senior Manager of Wheel-Trans and eventually the head of bus operations and bus transportation. This is where I got to know her very well and asked her to join me as the Deputy Chief Service Officer. It wasn't too long after that that Andy Byford approached me when Chris Upfold was leaving the organization and vacated the Chief Customer Officer position, and asked if Kirsten could assume that role, and she did. And just as a footnote, Kirsten is a lawyer by education. Now I'll move on to the January CEO report, which provides details on November's performance and results. One change that you'll note in the charts is we're now displaying progress over a 3 to 5 year period. Many of the targets that we're striving towards are not one-year targets, and truly they could be 5 to 7 year targets. In the introduction section of the CEO report, we've revived the performance scorecard, and particularly the ongoing trend column, and these can be seen on pages 3 through 7. We now show progress against long-term goals over time as opposed to year-to-year comparison. And this was done for a number of reasons. First, I believe we owe it to the public and ourselves to show long-term trends, both positive and negative. And secondly, as I mentioned, change and improvement often takes more than 1 year to realize. So even though a particular measure may be negative against the target, the overall trend, in fact, may be positive. It also demonstrates to staff, and I think this is very important, their achievements and their progress, even though they fall shy of the target. Now I'll move on to some of the KPIs. You know, I've been coming back to this board, or I've come back to this board a number of times over the years, outlining longer-term trends against what has been shown as a negative measure. An example of this is when I've shown the streetcar short turns and on-time performance graphs as outlined on pages 48 and 49. Although we've had significant challenges with the quantity of streetcars available for service, these charts clearly demonstrate staff's commitment to improve the quality of service to our customers. In these cases, we've demonstrated consistent progress and achievement. Now on to bus. Another chart I'd like to draw your attention to is on page 66, and this is the one that has mean distance between failure. And many of you have heard me talk in the past about what is important, or what do I look at as quality and customer service when it comes to transportation, and what does it mean to me? And many times I come back to vehicle reliability. Our bus maintenance staff have introduced new maintenance protocols and programs, as well as the fact that we've introduced new vehicles to improve the reliability of our fleet over the last 4 years. Today, there are 60 to 80 more buses remaining in service daily than just 3 years ago. That represents a 3 to 5% increase in capacity for our bus service. Now I'll turn on to move over to the subway. On page 37, you'll see a steady reduction in delay minutes on line 1. Compared to 2014, overall delay minutes have decreased by 30%, and a good deal in 2017, we're right around the target. On the following page, on page 38, what we've done is we've replaced the AM peak trains per hour KPI with a capacity to deliver in peak for subway. As part of our review of the performance indicators and ensuring that we provide value to our customers, we've improved our reporting on subway capacity, and that really is what's delivered versus what's scheduled. We've expanded this measure to capture both morning and evening peak periods and have set targets that are achievable while still giving us room for improvement. On Wheel-Trans, on page 52, I draw your attention to an interesting chart that has shown continuous progress over time. However, Wheel-Trans punctuality has dropped since August of 2017. Until then, we can clearly see the 4-year improvement until what we acknowledge the expected happened. When we introduced our 4-hour cancellation policy in September of last year, this gave customers greater freedom to cancel their trips while challenging us on scheduling some 13,000 trips a day. At the same time, we've experienced a doubling in the number of same-day bookings, which went from 1,000 a day to 2,000 a day. In working with ACAT to develop and introduce these changes, we knew that the changes to the service delivery model would have an impact on this KPI. We'll continue to work with ACAT to either re-baseline the area or to see if it needs it to be changed or remain the same over time. I'll also remind you that as part of our Family of Services program, we're working to procure a new scheduling software system which will improve how we schedule trips in the future. To ensure that we also mention areas of, I'll call them opportunity, one of the areas we need additional focus on is on page 58, and that's the employee absenteeism. This is a concern to us, and we acknowledge that over the last 4 years, we've seen increased absenteeism. In 2017, we did put an initiative together where an attendance management project team was established to focus on employees in service delivery with concerning absence levels. And I tell you, it's a little early to have further discussion on those results of the program, but we will be looking to add additional opportunities to address this area. Moving on to other highlights. We ended 2017 with the successful opening of the subway system extension to York Region and Vaughan. 6 new gorgeous stations managed under the new station management model, with customer service agents are now assisting customers in our stations while technology distributes fare media. The stations are Wi-Fi and cell phone equipped, and the rocket trains are serving the stations operated under automatic train control. And I've had a number of conversations with Anne Marie Carroll, the General Manager of York Region Transit, as well as Bruce McGregor, the Chief Administrative Officer of York Region. And I can tell you that they're thrilled with the service that we're providing, the partnerships between our staffs, and the relationship, with the increase in ridership that they're seeing on their bus service as well. The only continued concern being addressed is the art installation at Pioneer, obviously, and that was addressed in item number 10 today. I'll move on to New Year's Eve. It was extremely cold that evening, and operations was well managed, and was very light ridership. And I just want to thank the staff that worked that evening. It was actually very enjoyable. I'm also happy to report that Coxwell Station became fully accessible on New Year's Eve as well, with the opening of the elevators and a number of other accessible features, which I'll tell you. There was automatic doors at the station entrance and to the bus bay, a designated wheel trains bus bay, wide accessible fare gates, and new wayfinding signage throughout. So that was a nice success. Moving on, and I'll say prior to discussing the Bombardier delivery, I'm going to mention a couple of related operational items. The first one is in regards to the significant cold spell that first week of January. As was presented in October of 2017 board meeting, the number of streetcars available for service has declined in recent years. They're just getting older and they're coming to the end of their useful life. 3 years ago, we were putting out 200 streetcars a day. 2 years ago, we dropped it down to 190 a day, and last year, 170 a day. As identified in October, we're now moving in the direction of 150 a day. The actual number for February will be scheduled at 156, and staff will be doing everything possible to try to exceed that number where possible, and we'll be putting whatever vehicles are out as they become available. During the week of January 1st, we actually had an all-time low for vehicle availability, and that number hit 123, that includes 50 of the newest vehicles. Cold weather causes the old streetcars to just pretty much seize up. Brakes don't release, wiper motors don't work, and they won't work for the windshields. Doors freeze up and they won't open, and electrical and propulsion systems just seem to fail. The cold spell now has forced us, and we're calling it a Plan B, and what we're doing is we're proactively hiring bus operators the night before we know there's going to be inclement weather, and we're going to put buses on Carlton and Dundas, and we'll kind of move away from the former way of doing business. And this has been long-term in the planning, by the way, of spreading the remaining vehicles across the entire routes. What we do, we want to do well. As I mentioned in the report, the February board will be replacing the 505 Dundas and 506 Carlton streetcar routes with buses for an extended period of time. I did mention to the end of the year, but my belief is it'll be shorter than that. Now to Bombardier, if I could. As you're aware, Bombardier did not meet their commitment to deliver 70 low-floor streetcars in 2017. Today, 62 vehicles have been delivered and 59 are in service. Staff have advised me that by the end of this coming weekend, we should have 61 vehicles in service. In recent conversations with executives from Bombardier, they've advised me that 11 additional vehicles will arrive in the first quarter of 2018. This equates to the full complement of 70 due in 2017. The president of Bombardier will be coming to Toronto at the end of this month to discuss with me their manufacturing and delivering of streetcars for the remainder of 2018 and 2019. I will keep you apprised of the details of the conversation. I would like to mention, however, though, that during that real cold spell that first week, New Year's on, that these vehicles ran without incident, and we were very happy to have them as part of the fleet. On to a little bit about financials. On a monthly basis, we typically give you an overall snapshot of the TTC's financials. In conversations with our CFO, Tara Ball, as well as our head of finance and treasurer, Steve Conforti, they've recommended that we move to a quarterly reporting to enable us to review and analyze the monthly results so that we provide you with clearer explanations in year-end projections, as well as aligning us with city reporting. Lastly, there's been a lot of discussion in the past meetings regarding service hours provided in ridership. Inevitably, it comes around to talking about the TTC's ridership standards for bus. Through Kirsten, I've asked Jackie Darwood to ask her staff in strategy and service planning to take a few minutes and give us a simple explanation, highlights of what are our service standards. And in addition, I've asked them to provide an update of the King pilot projects. We have two short 5-minute presentations to give you. In closing, you may have noticed that in the board reports, they have been signed off, and we've done designating signing authority to the chiefs, so the chiefs and I will be here to answer any questions that you may have. So with that, if I could turn it over to Jackie to introduce the presentations.
I have with me today Mark Miz. Mark is the manager of service planning, and I'm going to ask Mark to go through the presentation for you, and whatever questions you have, we'll both try and answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you everyone for having me. My name is Mark Miz, and I'm the manager of service planning, responsible for planning TTC routes, service levels across the city. The purpose of this presentation is to provide an overview of the TTC crowding standard, the current state of overcrowding, and the TTC's plan to reduce crowding. Notice that you cannot see the presentation on the screen, and I will wait until that comes up.
I think we've got AV people looking at it right now.
Oh, it was the cable, perhaps.
Have you tried the on-off switch?
I did. It worked. Okay, I'll just restart. Again, the purpose is to provide an overview of the TTC crowding standard, the current state of overcrowding, and the TTC's plan to reduce crowding. So the crowding standards have three related purposes. They define the level of comfort that our customers experience on our vehicles. They set the capacity of a vehicle, and therefore, when demand is taken into consideration as well, the frequency of a route. The TTC sets crowding standards for all its vehicles, and these standards vary in the peak and in the off-peak. In the peak, the standards allow for more crowding, and in the off-peak, less crowding. The last trick didn't work, so the presentation's out again. Yeah. Is it this thing you're feeling? I think it's this thing leaning us against it.
Yeah, maybe.
Can we unplug for a second?
Can we take this out? This is his. It might be this. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the interruption. So the TTC sets crowding standards by vehicle type and also by time of day. In the peak, we allow for more crowding, and in the off-peak, less crowding. My next slide will illustrate this. Just want to also mention about recent changes that happened to the off-peak crowding standard. In August 2014, the TTC board endorsed the Opportunities to Improve Transit report. And in that report outlined a number of ridership growth initiatives. One of the initiatives was to change the off-peak crowding standard. And with funding from council in March of 2015, we've proceeded with implementing that initiative. The objective of the initiative was to provide more comfortable and more frequent service through, therefore attracting customers in the off-peak, which represents 60% of our ridership. Staff is planning to report back to the board in Q2 of 2018 with the results of that initiative and the performance and the ridership that we have gained. Can please? I don't want to do that. Did you want me to does everyone have the presentation in front of them? No? Okay. The purpose of this slide is to illustrate the change that was made as part of the Opportunities Report. That is a change to the off-peak crowding standard on bus and streetcar routes. Note that this slide is for illustrative purposes. The crowding standard that I'm using here is using a 12-meter bus. So just for purpose of orientation, the left side of the diagram shows the previous crowding standard. The right side shows the current crowding standard. Looking at the first row, there was no change to the peak crowding standard. The change occurred in the off-peak, specifically off-peak service every 10 minutes or more frequent, left side, middle box. This standard was eliminated, and in effect, the off-peak standard for service less frequent than every 10 minutes, left side, bottom box, became the standard for all routes in the off-peak. The right column shows the consolidation of the standard. The purpose of this slide is to show the effect of the crowding standard. We've taken existing demand as of December 2017 and applied the previous and current standard. So the table on the left shows the number of routes and periods of operation that are overcrowded if the previous standard is applied. The table on the right shows number of routes and periods of operation that are overcrowded if the current standard is applied. If you recall from the previous slide, there was no change to the peak crowding standard. Therefore, the peak crowding numbers are the same in both tables. Bus 25, streetcar 5, rapid transit 3. The change is seen in the off-peak standard. The table shows the previous standard indicating 54 periods of operation would be overcrowded. The table on the right that shows the current standard shows that 145 periods of operation are considered overcrowded. 118 on bus, 25 on streetcar, and 2 on rapid transit. As you can see, the number of routes and periods that are deemed crowded directly relates to the standard that we set for the TTC. Our primary focus will be on addressing overcrowding on bus services. We know that we, over the next couple of years, will be receiving the new streetcars, and that will be alleviating crowding on the streetcar services. We also know that ATC is coming online, and that will alleviate crowding on Line 1. As for the SRT, we are refurbishing trains, and that will provide us with more capacity, and those trains will come online and alleviate crowding. So therefore, our focus will be on bus services. The purpose of this slide is to illustrate the number of passengers standing for various states of off-peak crowding on bus services. I've used a 40-foot bus in this example, but just note that overcrowding also happens on buses that use, or on routes that use articulated buses as well. The first image represents 10% overcrowded. At 10%, there are approximately 3 standees. Of the 118 bus periods that are overcrowded from the previous slide, in the off-peak, 84 are under 10%. The second image represents 10 to 20% overcrowded. At 20%, this equals approximately 7 standees. Of the 118 bus periods that are overcrowded in the off-peak, 24 are between 10 and 20%. The third image represents 20 to 30% overcrowded. At 30%, this equals approximately 11 standees. We have 6 periods of operation that are between 20 and 30, and then 4 periods that are greater than 30%. So the previous slide focused on the number of standees for various states of overcrowding. This slide shows the amount of time they are standing. So for the purpose of orientation, the vertical axis represents passengers, or the number of passengers. The horizontal axis is stops along the route. The red line is the number of seats. Remember, we're focusing on the off-peak crowding standard. And the blue line is the accumulated passenger load. I've selected an example of service that is less than 10% overcrowded. This is the 131 Nugget that operates in Northeast Scarborough. On Sunday morning, it is 6% overcrowded. This means that there are up to 2 standees on average per bus. These standees are required to stand approximately 5 minutes on the route in the busiest direction in the busiest hour in the operating period. The total one-way travel time on the route is 26 minutes. Just an important note is that with averages, some trips may be busier than others. In this example, there's only 2 trips per hour, but routes that have higher frequency will see higher variation. Another factor that needs to be understood is that these figures assume that the service is operated as scheduled. If we do miss trips, the capacity decreases and the number of standees would increase. That's why it's critical to continue to pursue the service reliability program. That means updating schedules to reflect actual operating conditions and to continue to deploy run-as-directed buses. This is an example of a service that is approximately 25% overcrowded. The 91 Woodbine operates in East York and North York. On Monday to Friday during the midday, it is 25% overcrowded. This means that there are up to 10 standees for approximately 3 minutes on the route in the busiest direction in the busiest hour of the operating period. The total one-way travel time on the route is 35 minutes. Again, as in the previous example, the crowding figures depicted on this graph is based on averages, and therefore crowding could be greater on specific trips. Also note, as in the previous example, crowding could be greater if the route experiences operational challenges. And so finally, this slide speaks to the TTC's plan to reduce overcrowding. Priority 1 is to relieve crowding on bus routes in the peak periods. We have 25 periods of operation that we need to fix. Priority 2 is to relieve crowding on bus routes in the off-peak periods where crowding is greater than 30%. There's 4 periods of operation that we need to make service increases on. And priority 3 is to relieve overcrowding on the remaining off-peak periods. However, before we do this, staff will return with a performance review of the service initiative in Q2 of 2018. We want to compare what that additional investment will require compared to some of the other opportunities that will be tabled through the ridership growth strategy on the January 25th meeting. So this concludes the presentation on crowding.
Now, there's going to be a presentation on King Street also, so we'll just hold for questions, and then questions can be on CEO's report. That includes the CEO's comments and the 2 presentations. Is that okay?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lawrence Louie. I'm one of the transit planners in the Strategy and Service Planning Department, and I'm the lead planner for the Streetcar Network streetcar service. Today I'm here to give you an update on the transit performance on the King Street pilot project. As we know, the project began in November 12th, providing transit priority between between Bathurst Street and Jarvis Street on King, providing greater priority for streetcars while maintaining local vehicular access. In general, the early performance for the King Street Transit pilot from a transit perspective has been very positive. We've seen an improvement in service reliability, and this includes on-time performance and less bunching and gapping. We've seen an improvement in transit travel times across the corridor and across the whole route. And as a result, we're seeing some increased ridership as well. This slide presents the average travel times throughout the day through the pilot area. So this is just the between Bathurst and Jarvis in the pilot. We're seeing significantly improvements throughout the day. So we're seeing 15% reductions in average travel times throughout the day, midday, and off-peak, and during the peak periods as well. But something that is not being shown here in terms of the average travel times is the actual lived experience of our customers, which is in that range of travel times, which we're seeing a significant reduction in the extreme travel times that we sometimes saw when we were stuck in traffic and in heavy congestion. Also, more reliable travel means reduced wait times, and this is a key component of the overall travel journey time for our customers. What we've seen is these more predictable and reliable travel times means that our customers are voting with their feet and they are boarding the King Streetcar more and more. Currently, we are working on processing some of the counts that we have done on each of our streetcar stops along the pilot, and we hope to get that as part of the next update to the city data in February. However, based on some preliminary data that we have an early estimate of increased ridership on King Street of approximately 20 to 25%, and this is based on 2 key sources, which is on-street observations at our busiest point on the route, where we've seen demand increase by up to 25% in the morning peak period, but then also looking at our Presto tap data, and this is data that we're receiving on an all-day basis. The increase in Presto usage on King has increased by 40% compared to just 25% on other downtown streetcar routes. This data also suggests that the growth in ridership on King has not come at the expense of other downtown streetcar routes where we've seen no change or a slight increase in ridership as well. However, with this increase in ridership, we're seeing increased complaints from our customers about overcrowding, where we see customers unable to board full streetcars. And we're starting to see this impact in our travel time as well. As more people are trying to board and alight from crowded streetcars, we see longer dwell times at our stops, especially at the very busiest times. And this is having some impact on our ability to provide the faster service. However, we've taken some immediate actions to address some of the overcrowding. We've started introducing low-floor streetcars on the 504 King route. Basically now, we have in the morning, 18 of the 50 streetcars that operate on King Street are low-floor, 10 on the 514 Cherry, and now 8 on the 504 King. And these are very much timed to meet with the busiest times on the King streetcar route between, for example, eastbound between 8 and 9 a.m. At Bathurst Street. We continue to operate extra streetcars when they're available, as well as filling gaps with run-as-directed streetcars. And starting in February, we'll be making a few further changes to address some of the crowding, such as extending the 503 Kingston route to provide new midday service, but then also extending the route to Spadina Avenue. We also look at some off-peak service increases on the 514 Cherry route. We plan on further service changes in the starting in mid-May as well as in the fall, and we are targeting to have full deployment of low-floor streetcars on King by late 2018. So in summary, we've seen dramatic improvements to the service quality on King, which the results we're seeing our customers respond very positively to this. We continue to monitor our operations and ridership, and we're working very closely with City to make any adjustments to the pilot as needed over the next year. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So I know we have a lot of questions. We'll start with Commissioner Fragedakis and then go Crisanti and Heisey. No, you're not on yet.
Oh, sorry,
There you
now
are.
it's working. Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and happy 2018 to everyone. So my questions relate to the actual report that we got, not the presentation. So on page 26, it said that ridership in November was 3.4% less than the budget, and overall for the year ridership is 2% off budget. So ridership is below anticipated, but November was quite a bit worse. And I was wondering if you had any idea why.
So compared to last November, there was some weather issues, I think, in November this year that would have affected ridership, particularly in terms of special events. We had Grey Cup last year. We didn't have that this year. Overall, though, probably not much more in terms of detail about why 1 month last year was a little bit better than this year.
Okay. So beyond what's mentioned in the report, I was wondering if there are any more priority bus lanes being considered.
As part of the RGS, we are working with transportation services to see where else we can have these priority bus lanes.
Okay. On page 39, the report notes that rolling stock incidents increased by 11.9% due to an increase in brake issues. Is there or can there be anything done to address that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear, what page is that?
Sorry, it's on page 39. It says that the rolling stock incidents increased by 11.9% due to an increase in brake issues, and I was wondering if there's anything or can there be anything done to address that?
Through the chair, it's an increasing problem with the T1s. We are addressing it. There is no long-term fix other than replacing the rolling stock. There are intermittent fault on individual cars of brakes hanging on, and because it causes flats and everything else, we have to take the trains out of service. But we're aware of it and we're working with it with Bombardier as the original manufacturer.
Okay. On page 41, the report notes that there's a slight increase in delay incidents, generally as a result of switch and rolling stock issues, resulted in poorer performance. However, long-term programs in place to improve maintenance activities are expected to result in better results in coming periods. I was wondering, is there a financial or a budget issue there that needs to be addressed?
In terms of rolling stock, no. It's just the logistics of getting round to the entire fleet. So the Mark One's inherently unreliable as a train that is 30 years old, and we're currently life extending it. Of the 28 units, most of them have gone through mechanical refurbishment, but frankly these trains don't like cold weather because of the nature of the LIM motor, the linear induction motor. The Toronto Rockets are exceeding our expectation on performance, and they are way above their mean distance between failures, currently about 1.6 million kilometres operated before we get a 5-minute failure. A couple of months ago we actually did 2.6 million, which is way above the design. But the reality is on line 2 BD, with trains that are 15-year-olds going through a further life extension, I see no silver bullet for their reliability to significantly and sustained improvement. You know, they're starting to get old, and older trains need more care, more time, more money, but we do have the money for the State of Good Repair program. In terms of the signalling, we have several programs going on at the moment. We are moving to we're moving away from fix on fail to predictive maintenance. So we are renewing all of our train stops, our insulated joints, our track relays before they fail. So we can see an improvement overall in the last year in signal failures. However, in the winter, where we get builds up of snow and ice and very low temperatures, conventional signalling struggles with snow and ice because of obstructing the train stops, and they just don't function so well. But overall, our infrastructure performance delays, if you compare 2014 to 2017, the infrastructure is performing about 30% better overall in terms of minutes and instance of delay.
Great, thank you very much. That's my 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Crisanti?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just want to thank the CEO. It was a great report. Thank you very much, and good updates both on overcrowding and on the King Street pilot. First question, has the TTC received any direct concerns from businesses, from citizens, or anybody with respect to the pilot itself? Any direct calls made to the TTC, and what are the nature of those concerns if you did get them?
We're aware of the concerns of the small business through our work with the City of Toronto. I'm not aware of direct concerns to us, but surely through Twitter, et cetera, where we've been receiving those issues. But we're aware of them through the media and our work with the city.
Okay, so because the page 10 of the report speaks to that specifically, where and I'm glad to see it here, that you'll continue to work with the city to monitor the pilot, and also prepare to do all you can to assist the business in that corridor. So can you explain what that means? So what are you prepared to do to be able to assist the business? What discussions have you had to be able to, because look, it's clear what the concerns are. There have been, the businesses in that corridor have been very, very vocal, and rightfully so. So what is the plan for that?
Well, right now we're on the King Street Pilot Steering Committee, so we're working with our city partners, and part of our cooperation with them is to assist in the communication. You'll probably have seen some of the work that Brad Ross and the communications team have done around the King Street Pilot to promote that King Street is open for business. I do have Patrick Tobin here, who's the Director of Arts and Culture Services for Economic Development, and he can perhaps speak to what the city is doing and how we're working together.
Yes.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. We're working closely with the business improvement areas to develop a series of initiatives that will assist local business in weathering both this season and any changes to the pattern of use of the street brought about by the pilot. That includes things such as the marketing campaign mentioned before, building off the Everyone is King campaign led by the TTC, some cultural activations that were announced by Mayor Tory January 9, some targeted incentives focusing particularly on restaurants in the catchment area, which will roll out in mid-February and are being designed in consultation with the BIAs, and additional work on some overarching marketing to help people understand that, as was just mentioned, King Street is open for business.
Okay, and a lot of what you indicated, I already heard about. So has there been any follow-up to that? Is there any timelines for some of the things that you intend to implement? And clearly, some of the things that we heard in the most recent press conference with respect to, introducing some art and ice sculptures. And so feedback I got was, with some businesses who are seriously hurt with this, is like it's adding insult to injury. So I hope some of those comments are being taken seriously, and maybe we're rethinking what we need to do. That's a question.
That's a fair comment, Councillor. The businesses and the BIAs, as their advocates, have been clear that what will assist them most, they feel, is investments in marketing, to include potential consumer incentives, as opposed to street animation. So there is a look now to make sure that we're making the investments in the places that are going to have the greatest effect for the concerns as understood by all.
Okay. So I also want to be very clear on the net benefit in terms of improved travel times. So I've looked at all the stats and so on. Am I correct that I believe the number is the average improvement on travel time is averaging somewhere between 2.5 to maybe upwards of 4 minutes, depending on the direction and the time of day? Is that about right?
Councillor, that is correct. The average travel times have been reduced during most periods of the day, with the exception of the morning peak period. However, as I mentioned in my presentation, the range in travel times, basically the extremes where we are affected by congestion the most, those extremes have been reduced significantly, so the range of travel times has been narrowed significantly.
And the ridership numbers that have been discussed, I believe, about 65,000 people. Is that number, was that calculated entirely within that pilot project area, or was that inclusive of the entire King Line?
If you could just repeat the number for me, Councillor.
So 65,000 is the number that's being mentioned and thrown about in terms of the a number of people that use the ridership on King. And is that just the number, the ridership on the pilot area, exclusive to that area?
No, it's not. It's the ridership along the entire route for an entire day, and that is a 2014 number. The number just before the pilot started, we did a count, and that number showed 71,000. And we have since done another count in November, and that data we should have sometime in mid-February.
And the vehicular number that was mentioned was something like 20,000 cars per day, east and westbound. Was that also, that number also confined to the pilot area only, or did that take in?
Sir, this will be your last question. We're at 6 minutes.
All right.
That I'm not sure. That's a transportation services number, and unfortunately, I don't think we have anybody here to answer that one.
I guess my time's up for now. Maybe there's.
We can do another round if you like.
Thank you.
On my list is Commissioner Heisey, then Mihevik.
So my first question is, the 25% increase in passengers on King, do we think these are new passengers, or are they passengers from elsewhere in the system, for example, Queen Street? So, and my sense is we think they're new. And how were these people traveling before if they weren't taking the TTC? I'm interested in who do we think they are that they're new? Did they walk before? Did they drive a car? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, as Lawrence has indicated before, we have looked at comparisons in terms of extreme travel times that people used to have and the alternatives to using transit. And what we found is that prior to the pilot, on some parts of King Street, it was actually faster to walk than to use the streetcar, because you would probably have to wait for a number of trips to pass you by. So what we have seen, we have looked at the ridership on Queen, for example, which is an adjacent route, and based on Presto data, which is the most recent data we have, it hasn't shown any reduction on Queen. So what we have assumed is that we are getting some of those people who would have chosen to walk. Now that you don't have to wait for 2 or 3 cars to pass you by, they are making use of the streetcar. So as what we're seeing is as we add the capacity, it is quickly filling up.
So if we had a round-trip passenger today on King versus before, they're saving through this section of King, they're saving 6 minutes a day? 3 minutes each way?
3 minutes each way, yes, on average.
And you haven't quantified wait time. Do we have a sense of how, you mentioned 3 cars passing you by, 2 or 3. Even with the 25% increase in passenger, is it now 1 car that passes you by? So is the wait time less even with the increase in passenger traffic?
The wait time has reduced significantly because what we're finding is that the streetcars are operated now closer to what the planned headway was, the planned headway is. So therefore what you're finding is that people are not having to wait as long because they're not having as much gaps, for one. So, and the bunching is not there. So yes, and we have actually sent people out on the road to observe. Lawrence, for example, who's sitting here beside me, goes out there virtually every morning at the busiest points, and what we're finding is that whereas when we started, you used to have to wait 2 to 3 cars to get on, you probably can get on after 1 car now.
So saving 1 to 2 car wait in wait time, what does that translate into? How many minutes, roughly?
The headway on the 504 on its own is 4 minutes, but combined it's about, with the 514, it's about 2 minutes.
So I've saved, so it's 2 minutes each way on wait time?
Yes.
So now I've saved 10 minutes a day, and that's for 71,000 passengers, or is it fewer?
It's fewer because it's only the passengers in that. It's mainly the passengers outside of the area will also have an advantage, but I couldn't tell you, but it's within that corridor.
Okay, and then how many passengers a day within that section of the corridor, roughly?
But it's about 2/3 of the total.
So 50,000 a day?
Approximately.
So 50,000 passenger day times a 10-minute savings a day, which is consistent with what I've heard from people waiting at the stops. They've told me their travel time is down 10 minutes, and they're including wait time is my guess. That's 500,000 minutes a day per day for passengers. And have we tried to quantify that on an economic value basis, what the value of that passenger time is?
We haven't done that yet, but that's an analysis that we certainly can do.
Okay, I'd like to then go to photo enforcement. I've been pushing for photo enforcement on King Street for some time, and the Bay Street Clearway, about 10 years, in fact. Been very unsuccessful. What progress has been made since the last time this board visited this issue and asked staff to pursue photo enforcement on King Street? Because I ride my bike on King Street most days, including the last 2 weeks, and almost every traffic movement I'm seeing 1 car break the rules on a through movement.
We're with you on wanting for photo enforcement, but I think all the reports that we have done indicate that we can't do it on our own. And what we've been trying to do is work with our partners in transportation services and other groups to set up this working group. My last discussion on this was as recent as this morning. I asked what's happening with the working group, and the feedback I'm getting is our friends at Transportation Services, they want to help us, but they are currently going through a restructuring as I understand it. So as soon as that is finished, we are going to be getting together to try to see how we can push this along, because it is something that we want to get going as well.
So is that a polite way of saying that you haven't had a meeting of this working group?
No, we haven't.
Not one?
Not one, unfortunately.
It doesn't sound like it's a matter of great importance to transportation then. I mean, it wasn't the resolution on photo enforcement passed, I don't know, Kevin, do you know, 4 or 5 months ago? So we passed a resolution on photo enforcement several months ago. Could you tell us what date that was? Yeah, I'm done because I'm over my 5 minutes.
Okay, so let's, while we look for that, we'll go to Commissioner Mihevc.
Yes, thank you very much. On page 3 of just the performance scorecard, how do we measure customer trips? Is it by Presto and then extrapolate? Is it by fare, or is it by actual real counts?
It's a combination of things. With Presto, it's an actual count. With tokens, we actually count the tokens. Cash, more or less a count with some sampling of what distribution of cash would be adults versus seniors, for example. Tickets are weighed and sampled, weighed, and then prorated into a ridership. So it's a combination of factors that...
So do you do actual counts?
In some respects, yes. In a lot of respects, though, there's a lot of sampling that goes on and inferring from those samples. So the actual counts as a component of our ridership, it's really, frankly, limited to Presto, cash, and tokens. Everything else is a function of sampling and estimating.
I see. So these numbers are reliable only insofar as we have every customer paying or not paying with a little bit of tweaking for where we actually do physical counts.
4 months ago, they've done nothing.
Well, I guess the way we do it hasn't changed over time, so it should be consistent in that respect. Variations in, I'm not sure exactly where you're going with that, but...
Well, where I'm going is how accurate are these numbers, and how, you know, our numbers seem to be dipping.
Yes.
It is not my experience using as a frequent TTC rider. I have a feeling that some of this is, of course, people not paying. So it does go to the very core of how do we, so there's that piece, but there's also then how many buses do you put on a route? And how do you know that you're not overcrowding an already overcrowded system because you're not counting everyone?
Well,
so the count is real.
Yes.
The count is becoming a real key piece for us to make sure that the right service is out there.
The revenue, so what you're looking at is revenue ridership. The customer trips are revenue ridership. The methodology to determine the ridership hasn't changed for eons, so there's a stability in that at least. Not to say that there isn't increased fare evasion, but the way that we count rides from a revenue ridership point of view has remained constant and consistent.
And revenue drives the service, correct? Revenue rides is what drives the number of buses you put on
So
a route.
perhaps, Jackie, you could speak to the service design issues.
Thanks, Kirsten. Through the chair, when we're planning service, what we actually use is counts, ridership counts. So we have two ways of getting ridership counts. As you know, Council, we have manual counts, which can be a riding count with our traffic checkers physically being on the bus, or we have standing counts with our traffic checkers. But right now, what we're using, we're getting a lot of counts from our automated passenger counters, and those give us very updated counts. We are getting counts almost every board period. We are getting counts to review what's happening on the system in terms of physical bodies on board vehicles.
Okay, so for revenue purposes, our numbers are from folks who collect the revenue.
Yes.
But from a service delivery point of view, the numbers come from automatic counting and from manual counting.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. My second set of questions, I have. I'll just start at this.
We'll do other rounds if you need so.
Okay.
You use your time, but if you need more.
Okay. Thank you. The Dundas car and the Carleton car. First, it's one line. Just to this. Do you not think this deserves a report? This is a major change in service for to make sure that we have all the accountability mechanisms in place, that this is to ensure us that this is a good decision. Is there a report coming on this, or is this one line it? That even a careful reader might have missed.
It's a construction project, and we didn't plan on a board report. If one's going to be requested, then we will certainly come back with one.
Okay, where are the buses coming for this? How many buses are going
It's
to
a,
be
it's
used?
a net increase of 23 buses over and above what was previously scheduled on buses on streetcar routes. We also are in the January, February, March board period where we have less demand on bus service than we do, say, in the construction season. Moving into May through September, we know that we can increase our available buses from 1575, what we scheduled in September, all the way up to 1640 as of September, or moving into the end of 2018. So we are able to provide the buses to do this. This is the increase in availability of buses is made possible through the purchase of Markham Road, as well as the 80 buses that are coming in through the PTIF funding, net increase of 80 buses, and also some adjustments to the operating spare ratio.
Those were.
So we'll come back to you just because we're a bit over 6, and we'll go to Commissioner Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regard to the King Street line, do we have numbers on weekend ridership?
Through the chair, we do have some weekend Presto data, which does indicate a similar increase as to the weekday.
No, I'm just, you know, the 65,000, now 71,000, that was done by, basically by physical counts. A physical count was done in November, and then of 2014, I gather a physical count was done recently in November. So have we also done those physical counts for weekend travel?
We haven't done that since the pilot started.
So we don't know, no, it doesn't matter when the pilot started. Have we ever done count? Do we know how many people ride the King car on a Saturday or a Sunday?
Yes, we have those because that's what we used to plan the service.
Okay, and so what is that number?
We can make that available to you. We're looking that up right as we speak.
What do we know of the 65 or 70 1,000 people that are riding that service? Do we know what percentage of that is done prior to 7 o'clock at night?
Yes, we would know that as well because we do our counts, but we have hour by hour, period by period of day.
Can you take a guess? Is it 80%? Is it 75%?
We're getting that information as well.
Okay, so how would the progress of the streetcar be impacted if we were to have evening and weekend parking on King Street? I never got an answer from our city transportation on this, and I'm wondering if the TTC can tell me how the streetcar would be impaired if there was evening and weekend parking on street.
Through the chair, as we noted in the presentation, the average travel time savings that we're seeing is not only during the peak periods, but during the off-peak periods as well, where we've seen an average decrease in the evenings, for example, of a 15% reduction in the average travel times.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the question very directly. So I'm not talking about changing the turning restrictions. So there are fewer cars traveling along King between Jarvis and Bathurst. That makes the progress of the car, it makes it move more readily. If on-street parking instead of planters were allowed in the evenings on the weekend, how would that, from a physical standpoint, I don't see how that's going to impair the movement of the streetcar. So if somebody could, I'd like it if somebody could tell me.
Through the chair, through the experience that we've had in the past, especially on evenings with parking on King Street, particularly in the section between Spadina and Bathurst, is the large number of curbside uses, such as drop-offs and pickups. When parking is in place there, those activities actually occur on our streetcar tracks, which cause significant delay, not just to the streetcars, but to overall traffic as well. Some of our most extreme travel times that we've seen in the past have been on Friday and Saturday evenings through the Bathurst to Jarvis section.
The streetcar tracks are in the middle and parking spaces are at the curb.
The point that Lawrence has been trying to make is that the parking spots that were available on King were fully utilized when parking was available, and therefore the drop-offs and pickups that needs to happen along there was actually happening on the right-of-way. So that would obstruct the streetcar movement as well.
Okay, do we have any sense as to how problematic that was?
We could ask our friends from Transportation Services to give us some indication of data that they would have collected on before they made those decisions.
Okay, so because all of the parking spaces were being fully utilized, you're saying people were stopping in the middle of the road to drop people off?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And one of the things that we have noticed is that even we have lifted the restrictions are lifted currently against taxis in the evenings and on weekends, and that has led to a lot of congestion during those periods.
Between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m.?
Because that's the time when the entertainment district comes alive, and there's lots of traffic along there, and where we experience lots of delays during that time. If there is no police monitoring to assist us in getting the traffic moving and obeying the signals and signs along there.
Okay, that's my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the answers.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Any first time before we go back to having Chrysanthi? Just before we go to that, oh, they're gone. We had students here from Leonard Junior Middle School, but obviously our scintillating debate has driven them out of the room. So we'll go to round two, and we'll start with Commissioner Mihevc. I saw that hand first, and then Chrysanthi.
Thank you very much. I want to deal with the overcrowding issue. I just want to make sure that we're getting it right, because right now there is the Budget Committee is dealing with the issue. As I understand it, you are able to reduce overcrowding, or sorry, not have overcrowding, with a $12.5 million injection on an annual basis.
That's correct.
Is that correct? And if my memory serves me right, it's $3.5 million for off-peak and $9 million for peak.
The opposite. $9 million for off-peak.
Off-peak, okay, so my apologies, okay. Then for 1/3 of the year, it would be something like $4.2 million putting them together.
That's correct.
Can I ask you this? Is our overcrowding standard a standard, or is it an aspiration?
That would be the current standard.
So it's a standard?
Yes.
So when you do your counts and when you do your service planning and you find that a route is overcrowded by 5%, 10%, you say, we have to put an extra bus there because we're over the standard. And it doesn't require you to go up the ladder. You have a standing directive that you meet the demand that is out there.
That's correct, and those are the standards that we brought to the board in June and was approved, and that's what the planners use in determining when do we add service or when there's a need to reduce service.
Okay, so the question that I don't get is why would this not be part of the base budget request that we make of the city? We have a standard. We are operating on a number of routes below the standard, peak and off-peak. I know we can do it, because we're going to have an uphill battle pushing that rock up the hill. And I'm wondering, why are we, even as a commission, not apprised that we're actually overcrowded in the system? Wouldn't that be a time to report to the board and make it part of the budget presentation? Maybe this is a question to the manager. Why are we finding this out so late in the game, what the numbers are, whether we can do it? I appreciate all that work, but this should have been in the budget.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Up until this point, as we've had discussions about vehicle availability, vehicles became available when TYSSC opened, and they were reallocated to the other routes where we possibly could. And you may recall, we told the board they were being reallocated to help out Streetcar. Right? And what we're talking about now is what's going to become available later on this year. And what we talked about, this only came about in the last couple of months in discussions. We're buying new buses, and we've asked the bus maintenance department to retain extra buses come August, September timeframe. And what we've also asked them to do, we do not have communication systems right now for that. So we've been asking them, can they come up and find communication systems to keep these buses? Right? So there's still the question out there about it, but when we were asked what we could do, all right, to improve service, it was identified by the staff that if we could do anything, right, it would be around the September timeframe, all right, and it would be about 24 buses that would pull in. And at the same time, as I mentioned earlier in the CEO's report, our fleet is running so reliable right now. we've actually kind of taxed the fleet and taxed the bus maintenance staff with on the first week of this year, giving us an extra 35 or 40 buses a day, taking out of spare ratio,
Okay.
which is not
This is great. Good.
right. So this is all coming to fruition. Up till now, we have not had, and we're still pushing the envelope to do it in September.
Okay, so when the budget meeting happens at City Council, and when you're asked, are we at standard, and you're gonna say, no, we're not at standard, what puts us at standard, you'll rhyme off some of the numbers that have been mentioned, and that it is an obligation on the part of TTC to build a system to our standard, which we are not doing.
That's true, sir, but through you, Mr. Chair, again, but up till now, right, we have not had the buses in the fleet and the fleet size to do it.
Okay, but in September 1st, you will.
We'll have a minimal number of buses to put in service to address this.
Will you be able, on September 1st, your staff has said yes to me at the Budget Committee, will you be able to meet the standard that we have set as a commission on September 1st, if you're given the funds to do so?
No, we will not be able to take care of all the areas. I believe you were commenting on the specific number of routes that you put in that briefing note, the 24 peak period bus. Am I correct? That's correct. So they're trying to get to the standard. We will not be able to do the entire standard. We do not have the bus fleet.
Well, may I suggest that we get a brief, okay.
Wrap up, go.
May I suggest that, just on that piece there, that we get very clear numbers on what is possible when during the year, so that we can report very clearly to council on where we are behind on our standard before we expand service and give freebies out or relieve fees, that we know that our base budget request has not yet been satisfied.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Crisanti.
Thank you. Just a couple of more questions, starting with King, and if I have time, a couple of more other areas as well. So page 3 of the King Street report, you indicated that the eastbound benefit is 1%, there it is, morning peak is actually slower with the pilot than before? Can you explain that?
Through the chair, this is data that we received from the December. In the November period, when the pilot first started, we did see a slight improvement. In the December period, we did see a slight increase to the November, and then it is slightly worse than the base. However, we are considering that the overcrowding that we're seeing and the longer dwell times, we're thinking that is the effect of that.
One of the other factors that needs to be taken into account when we look at that number is we tried to find a similar period in terms of weather last year or to this last December, and there was none. In that the base number, the base period, that number was taken in, the temperature was much better. That was in early October. So we have to consider a number of different things when we look at the numbers. We cannot just look at them in isolation. So that's one of the things we've been looking at. What are the conditions? We have the overcrowding that is still persistent, and also we looked at what was the impact of the weather.
All right. So because, look, all the reports that I listened to and what I'm reading in front of me, we're being very clear in terms of describing this as a success. But what I'm hearing is that in this particular case, it's going eastbound. It's not. It hasn't improved at all, and average speeds have maybe increased anywhere from 2 to 4 minutes on average. From my perspective, I would not go anywhere near defining that as a success. It's an improvement, and at best, that's. So I'm wondering why are we defining that as a success when I think there's still a lot more work to be done to move transit riders at a much quicker speed, and maybe this isn't working.
You're absolutely correct that there is more work to be done, and we are actually working with our transportation services partners to determine whether or not one of the things, for example, that has not been activated yet as part of the pilot is the transit signal priority. So those have been turned off during the pilot. They were in operation before the pilot. So what you could see is that even without the transit signal priority, we have been making progress. So if we have identified, for example, at Bathurst, that there is some delays for the streetcars getting into the area. So we are working with our partners to determine what can be done. I don't know if Kirsten has any updates on that.
Okay, so there's another thing I want to get to before I run out of time. Earlier in the report you mentioned the streetcars are full, I believe. Did you say they're full at capacity at what time of day? At peak time?
We are seeing a lot of crowding, particularly in the busiest hour of the morning peak period, as well as the busiest hour in the afternoon peak period as well, leaving from the downtown core. So this crowding is throughout the day at various times.
So it's safe to say that maybe between 10 and 3 p.m. and possibly after 6 or 7 p.m. that is not occurring?
Based on the information that we have right now, we do see that our busiest hour numbers outside of the peak periods has increased as well, such as on weekends and the afternoons. And this is part of the reason why we are looking to increase service in the off-peak periods starting in February on the 514 Cherry.
Okay. Just want to go, my last question to the area of Wheel-Trans revenue. I noted on page 7 that the Wheel-Trans revenue has dropped to 6.9 million from 7.6. Am I reading that correctly? Our target was 7?
That's correct.
So how are we progressing with moving towards the more efficient vehicles that we've talked at this commission a number of times?
Okay, that's 5 minutes, so that'll be your last question for this round.
Mm-hmm.
So through the chair, we have received 15 vehicles thus far of the new ProMasters that we're putting into service, and we are noticing that we are lowering our per trip costs, although our revenue reduction is directly related to the ridership, and our ridership forecast was 20% growth over 2016, and we are now closer to 10 or 11% over 2016, and therefore our revenue is directly reflected because of that as a reduction.
Okay, Commissioner De Laurentiis.
My question is around the data, and I thought there were some good questions from Commissioner Heisey earlier. So the data so far is showing just a couple of minutes savings in time, but increased ridership. The data that I found particularly interesting was the answer to the question around the extreme travel times. If we included the wait time, then it's a pretty significant number. 10-minute saving is pretty huge. Can we not add to this report an extra line here that focuses on that data point as well? Because I think that's going to be helpful when we come to the end of this pilot to determine what changes we want to keep and what modifications we may want to keep at a particular time. So my question is, could we add that? Because I think that really helps the dialogue and the conversation, as well as the analysis on this.
Through the chair, the city's dashboard that is being issued on a monthly basis does include information on the travel time ranges, which does have an indication of the extremes. As for the wait times, we are monitoring those, and we are working to develop a measure to communicate that publicly.
Commissioner, we have Jacqueline Hayward from City Transportation who can probably also comment on your question.
Thanks, Councillor. We certainly are taking a how do we approach the communication of the pilot in these dashboards to convey not only the travel time improvements, which are in the range of 4 minutes, but also the reliability, which we've calculated to date at about 33%, as well as the increased capacity that's been put on the route and how overall that makes for a better transit passenger experience. So that, coupled with the other measures of success we have in terms of understanding the impact on other routes, which has notably not been significant, and we're putting all of those together. We need to better communicate that in the next round. We know that.
Any other questions? Wow, round 3. Round 2 for Heisey, so we'll go there, and then we'll go back to the Mahevik Crescenti tag team. Go ahead, Vice Chair.
So just on a personal experience basis of the transit system for myself, I am not upset by a 3 to 5 minute standing experience. And my experience of the people that I've traveled with is that where somebody has an infirmity, the Toronto public is pretty good and will offer their seat up. So I try to understand, and I'm not being critical, I'm trying to understand why it's considered significant to have to stand for 1 to 3 to 5 minutes, and we're only talking 3 people, to create this higher off-peak standard. And maybe it's because I don't understand it, but I'd like someone to explain to me why that's considered significant, because I wouldn't have thought the goal would be that everybody would have a seat off-peak, but maybe that is the goal. Why would that be the goal? I don't personally need it. Do our customers feel that they should have that?
That was a standard that we brought to the board in June as a means of trying to improve customer comfort. But what we we implemented that back in 2015, and as Mark mentioned previously, we're going to be evaluating that to see what was the result of that. Has it gained us more ridership in the off-peak hours? And therefore, is this a good measure for us to maintain, or can we increase that standard to have some standees and use the resources to boost service elsewhere? So we're going to be doing, I think it's in the second quarter, we're coming back with that post-implementation report to say whether or not it's a standard that we should keep because it has served us well, or is it a standard that we can modify and then use some of those hours to do something else to improve the service.
So then, as sort of a summary, it's potentially a service improvement that might lead to more net ridership.
Yes.
Okay. I heard Mr. O'Leary say that there was a 3 to 5% capacity increase in bus in the last 2 to 3 years. I just wondered if you could give us the corresponding data for growth or lack of growth in passengers on those buses. So if we have a 3% or 5% increase in bus capacity, what happened on the passenger side? Did we keep up, or are we behind based on passenger growth?
I'm not sure we've looked at that, but we can get that information for you.
Okay. You also said, Rick, that York Region has seen an increase in bus passenger traffic, and I know you're from there. Do you have any idea? Can you quantify that?
He's from Boston.
Well, he started, in between he went to York Region. I think of him as a Canadian now.
It's a York Region.
That was just in conversations with them in the last month. They have them having to put extra buses out because of the increased ridership up to the mall area.
Okay. Well, that maybe it would be
have the staff talk
a stat to get next time round. And as part of rolling out the TYSSE, we also closed up, we took buses out of service, bus lines out of service. Have we analyzed how that net out has worked out? So how many, did we get more passengers? Did we get less? Like, what's the implications in the system, and when will we know that?
We haven't had the results coming in yet. We haven't analyzed the results of those yet because we usually wait for at least 3 months after a new service has been implemented before we do an evaluation, so we don't have those numbers right now.
Okay, so my final question relates to the Bluffers Park item.
Well, let's wait till that item to ask it.
It relates kind of to off-peak buses. I guess I can ask it later.
Sure, because we're going pretty deep on this item. And we've still got at least 2 more questioners, so Crisanti, then Mihevik. Round 3.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chair. No, now I just noticed that the transportation is here. Maybe I can get an answer to my earlier question, which was if the vehicular data was based in the confined pilot area, and I believe that number was 20,000 cars versus 65,000 people in terms of ridership. Do we have an answer for that?
Sure, Councillor. The 20,000 cars was based on numbers for vehicles from a November 2015 count, and that was the highest point of vehicles traveling along the corridor counted at Spadina. There were 2 other locations that were there were 11,000 and 15,000 vehicles respectively, so we didn't want to underestimate the vehicle number, so we're referring to the 20,000 vehicle number.
So November 2015, is that what I just heard?
That's correct, Councillor. We have a baseline data point that was pre-pilot that will be released as part of our February 12th release of data that will include the baseline as well as the new information we have from January volume counts.
We'll have more current volume counts in the next report.
That's correct, Councillor. We'll have the baseline volume counts as well as volume counts through the pilot until the end of January.
Okay, has your department been getting any calls, concerns, and complaints from motorists? Or comments of any type?
Councillor, largely those kind of comments would be anecdotal, but we've had specific location issues that we've had to address in terms of loading at key locations and accessible parking at key locations, but we haven't en masse had comments coming directly from drivers.
Okay. So another question may not be for transportation, but so do we have the number of stops along the pilot? Has that changed since the pilot started, or is it the same as before?
It's the same number of stops.
Same number. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Mihevik.
Yes, just because we're on the King Street piece, and I know it is related. We have started a St. Clair Avenue almost 10-year review. And I know change is hard. Change is hard for people. And I don't know what the study is going to say, but when is that due? Because it might give some comfort to people if they saw that there's a trajectory that might be in a positive direction.
The current schedule has us coming to the board in July of 2018.
July of 2018. Okay, my last set of questions are related to Bombardier. So Bombardier is at number 61 right now. Are they saying that they're going to be back on track with their delivery schedule within the first quarter?
Through you, Chair. No, in the first quarter, they've advised me that 11 of the vehicles that did not show up in 2017 would be delivered. They're right now, in just preliminary discussions with them, they're looking in the area of an additional 50 or 60 for the remainder of the year. But they'll come with me with the manufacturing and delivery schedule.
So the total number of deliveries in 2018 will be how many? What are they hinting at?
So if including the, we'll say 60 that they delivered, if they could get us another 50 or 60, you could have 120 vehicles here by the end of the year.
So my notes from a previous board report, well, I'll read it to you. I won't put it on the thing. It says that they were due for 76 in 2018.
That's correct. Because I brought that to their attention, and I said, you owed us 76 plus the 11. All right, now we're looking at 87, and they said they're reassessing that, and they're coming back with a schedule for me. But they verbally have said to me that they're in the additional 60 range. They believe they can do better, but they don't want to overcommit, because I've made it clear that we're having a very difficult time in our own scheduling of streetcars.
Okay, so back to the streetcars and I would appreciate a report, because frankly I think there's a lot of issues on Dundas and College. You only need 24 buses to service both Dundas and Dundas and College?
No, we need approximately 75 buses, or 70, Lawrence, is that correct? The 24 was a net increase over and above buses that are already on streetcar routes that are being reshuffled, and streetcars are being redeployed on them. So we're backfilling on some routes to move buses to Dundas and Carleton.
Okay, I'll let it go. Thank you.
Other questions? Going once, twice, three times. Thank you. Anyone to speak on this item? Commissioner Mihevc?
Well, only to say thank you for the report. There's a lot, of course, happening at the TTC, but I do think that the trajectory of these chief executive officer reports seems to be a lot, and everything's in it, and we can't move motions for more reports. And really, I would find it more helpful if we are at the end of the day, the accountability part of the TTC, bringing the public in and bringing council in on conversations. Some of these things should be parceled out as reports. Anything that is in any way beyond minorly significant, I would like a report so that we can move it, either additional motions or to support or to do whatever. And the biggest one, I think, this time is the Dundas and College one. I think that is a major change, given that it is projected to be for a year, but others as well. Like if there's substantial changes around Bombardier, like I hear it all the time from folks, and we need fuller answers rather than 2 or 3 sentences in the report. Maybe that's the only piece that I'll say for now. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Other speakers? Anyone want to move receipt? I'll move that. All in favor? That carries. Thank you. Item number 2, it would be the ACAT minutes, and I will ask. I'll introduce Chair Gillespie to introduce those minutes, but also to thank her for her service as chair of ACAT. She's been a great advocate. I mean, even before she was chair, but certainly in this current role. And I believe this is her last meeting as chair with us, and I know she'll be around and her voice will still be loud. Again, I just want to thank her for all her work that she continues to contribute to make the TTC better for all of our riders. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. It has been my privilege to serve as ACAT chair for 2017. And for those on the board who may not be aware, the chair, Mr. Cole, and vice chair, Mr. Heisey, along with the CEO, Mr. Byford, and in his success, Mr. Leary, also join the ACAT executive in a quarterly meeting each quarter, and that has been taking place for quite some time. It has been my privilege to sit across the table from these distinguished gentlemen, and I have been vice chair in 2016, where I was introduced to that process. I'd like to also thank, and seeing as this is the time for that at the moment, I'd like to thank TTC staff for allowing ACAT's Design Review Subcommittee to have a tour of the TYSSE in December the 13th. It was arranged by staff, and the ACAT committee was there on a very inclement weather day. I guess that had been referred to earlier during the ridership discussion. The TTC were most accommodating and amenable to staff. They even provided drinks at halfway point during the tour of the 3 stations that we saw, along with water for the service animals. So little things like that make a big difference, especially in weather that isn't the best. I would now like to report on the November 30th ACAT minutes, and I have 2 subcommittees to report today. It will be briefer. The Wheel-Trans Subcommittee, Sandy Corcio, the Customary Abilities Liaison, presented a a presentation on the eligibility application process to the Wheel-Trans Subcommittee. Regarding the eligibility conditions of conditional, unconditional, temporary, and ineligible, and explained the process to the Wheel-Trans Subcommittee, and a great discussion was had by all. It was greatly appreciated by some of the members. The Design Review Subcommittee and Service Planning Committees had a joint meeting, and I took that as the highlights because it covers both committees in one round. The purpose of that committee, ACAT was requested to provide input into the Waterfront Reset Phase 2 study, and members stressed the importance of incorporating accessibility integration into the beginning of the process from the outset and not having it as an afterthought. It is very easy to do this, but what happens on occasion, and many of us have understood this entirely, is that if it's incorporated from the outset, then issues will not arise later that cannot be changed, and justifications for said when going out, it makes it a lot more difficult. The note here, though, is what I'd like to raise is the importance of the Union Station to Queens Quay connection. There were several options on the table, and members of the two subcommittees favored the retaining of a direct streetcar connection from Union to Queens Quay rather than a moving sidewalk option, which would be unacceptable using the funicular route. This funicular, for those who are not transit geeks, would refer to the tramway type of arrangement. It would mean an extra change for people moving from the streetcar to the new vehicle and then back into Union Station. And it may not be the best option to have service animals, for example, on moving sidewalks. Not because the sidewalk isn't safe, because there may not be an option when the sidewalk has reached the end to direct your dog to jump off and thereby getting its paws caught. There is training that can happen, but it's something that when you're in an unfamiliar space, it's probably not your best option. I've given my closing remarks at the beginning, so as far as my thanks and so forth, but it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you the 2018 ACAT executive. Raymond Delera was vice chair in 2017 and has served well as my eyes, often on the committee, doing the what's around, what's going on, and for those of you who know me well, those are things that I like to know a lot. Desiree-Ann McKilrick, this is her second year on ACAT. She is one of the co-vice chairs. She also is employed by the Helen Keller Society as a certified orientation and mobility instructor. She works with deaf-blind and hard of hearing individuals, assisting them to learn to travel. She also was the individual who I may have reported to you earlier, who was Mr. Byers' guide when he took a subway experience under blindfold back in October. Mazen Aribi is the second co-vice chair. He is not unfamiliar to many of you, and it's welcome back to ACAT. That concludes my remarks and my presentations to you on the board. I will attend the board meetings continuing and moving forward. Thank you very much, and congratulations to the new ACAT executive.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you, Madam Chair, for all your good work. Welcome to our new chair, Raymond, to Desiree-Ann, and of course to, I don't know who that young guy is there that we haven't seen around here very often, but Mazen, welcome back. We welcome all of your contributions and look forward to it. With that, I will move a receipt of the minutes. All in favor?
I actually move an amendment for a second on that. That's not my one.
It's a receipt item. Well, why don't you say it, and then that way it can be on the record.
Sure. Well, I was just going to ask that we make some kind of notes in the minutes of this meeting that we thank her for her contributions to the committee and to the commission. I think her contributions are significant, and I think we should have some kind of record of it.
Well said, thank you. With that, I'll move receipt. All in favor? Unanimous. We'll take that as, again, thanks for Debbie's good work. We're on to item number 6, and we do have some members of the public who do want to speak on this, and I'll read out the list as we have it here. Bear with me. We've got Michael Rosenberg, Hamish Wilson, Joseph Cates, Fred Weinigust, and we added with motion earlier today. Sorry, I've got too much paper here. Where are you? There you are, TTC riders. Yeah, great. So let's go in that order. You all have 5 minutes. Please come up to the podium there. And I'll start your time. And just make sure your microphone's on. Bit of a different setup there. You're live. Hot mic. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Michael Rosenberg. Just to begin with, I think it's better if we use travel time rather than crowding as our main concept when we write these reports. This is probably more relevant for surface routes where certain decisions like large vehicles can actually make travel time worse. On the trains, there's not as many decisions you could make that would differentially impact travel time and crowding, but I think it's still important that we use the term travel time, and that would include waiting time, as our main concept for when we're trying to improve service. In terms of the specific items here, the one I want to talk about most is the fare strategy. The report says it was already approved that there would be differential fares by time of day. I can assure you that nobody knows about this. I think that this is a very questionable thing to do. Right now, you don't seem to be focusing much on the different types of customers you have. The switch over to Presto is maybe working well for commuters who have a good job. They don't worry about having to put excess money on the card. They won't be affected if different routes have different travel different fares or anything like that. They don't travel a lot of different routes, so they won't get as confused by different changes throughout the system. I think that the Presto card, the ability to change things all the time, is actually a disadvantage rather than an advantage. It's part of the problem with the Presto card. Right now, the people who are using the Presto card are the ones who find it easy or better, but as soon as you make other options impossible, when you force everyone to get a Presto card, then you'll be forcing the people who actually find tokens or some other system better to use a system that is actually worse for them. Then you'll suddenly start getting the complaints. You're not getting those complaints now because right now people have a choice, so only people who actually find Presto better are using it. In the future, you're going to find a problem. And the problem essentially is that you're not understanding your customer base. Not everybody is a commuter. Not everybody has a good job and doesn't mind having excess money on the card and doesn't really care whether the system decides to charge them a little bit of extra money here or there. I'm talking about people who don't make the same trip every day, are not going to be aware of every little difference throughout the system. I'm talking about people who don't have excess money. When they get to the station and they find out that there's an increase in fare on a particular route, they just won't have that money and they can't make the trip. I'm also talking about people who receive fares from other people. Like, I run a group where I give out about $10,000 worth of fares to people. Those people don't pay anything for that fare. Somebody else pays for it. So those single-use fares that you're going to be coming up with in the future, they need to be available to groups like mine that are not charities. The staff are still saying those will only be available to charities. That means you're going to have about 100 people who no longer get fares, because unless anybody can buy those fares at the $3 price to give out, certain people are not going to get fares that they get now. So I think you're unaware of how these changes in fares are actually resulting in an increase in fare to a number of people that you may not realize you're actually increasing the fares for. And more importantly, there are people who either don't speak English, may have intellectual difficulties. They're not going to be able to keep track of these things. And you have problems like the Presto card doesn't indicate how much fares how much money is left on it so conveniently. Some people who are commuters and have excess money on their cards all the time won't have a problem with that. But the people who will get dinged with the extra 25 cents when your card runs out of money, that's going to be people who are poor people, or people who don't speak English, or people who aren't as intellectually gifted as some other people. That's who's going to have problems with this. So in summary, I basically have 2 points here. One is, please remember that your customer base is much broader and wider than a set of commuters who might find some of these strategies easy to handle. Other people won't. And secondly, please remember that when the single-use fares come out, they need to be available to non-charities, because otherwise I could bring in 100 people here. I pay for their fare one last time, but I won't pay $3.25 in the future. And you can sit here and listen to 100 people say they're not going to get fares anymore in the future. And that can go on for a few hours.
Great. Thank you very much for being here. Any questions for our presenter? There are none. Thank you for your presentation. Next on our list is Hamish Wilson. Once you're settled in there, I'll start with 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, sir. I'm hoping I can manage to use this device. Does that actually get it? Yes, I believe it does get it operating. That's wonderful.
Go ahead.
Thank you for this report. And I know there's an awful lot of things going on, so it's hard to be on top of everything, for sure. But at the same time, pardon me, I'm afraid that it's inadequate in a few areas. There's scale. Do you really know how rough and crowded it is for your paying customers, from your paying customers' point of view, to the point one expert put out a tweet to quote fake, or the hashtag fake news? Do you all use your services? Maybe the province should mandate the suspension of all driving privileges, taxis, Uber, Lyft, and chauffeurs for the TTC commissioners, by the way. The province, it would have to be the province, because I don't think you'd do it necessarily. There's inadequacy in the solutions proffered. A lot is ignored, I feel, or ruled out, and it seems to be put it all off until automatic train control, which will make a difference. I'm not saying that it won't, and the next election. And in the meanwhile, keep the customers crammed in, and drum roll, there's a study. There's the action. There's also no real sense of urgency, whether it's for the overcrowding danger at Bloor or Yonge, or any sense of the climate crisis, and or how rough the system really is in the crush hours. So pardon me, I am a little bit on the critical side, and it isn't necessarily the staff's fault. The Webster effect is pronounced still, but there's also overload from doing too much of the wrong thing as directed, just following orders. Now, back about 20 years ago at the joint CUDA-APTA UITP conference at the Convention Center, the Zuri Mobile people talked about being mobility providers, not merely transit. That is, we need to get out of our silos, and it does seem that the only thing we can consider to do is what we were doing and subway technology, though not every power plant is a nuke, and they're not always put in the right places either, by the way. So, quite honestly, let's think surface. Because that is what we should be doing, I think, because it has to be done faster. You're in a set of crises, and it really needs to be done faster. And there's too much reliance on old plans. So we desperately need new corridors, as well as faster sub-regional transit, I think, not merely adding on tweaking the existing thing. It'll be a brittle system with automatic train control still. This is something from 15-odd years ago. It's really important to look at this corridor that was proposed for east of Yonge Street. That's what we should be thinking of, is what can we be doing for actually a new corridor to provide the relief. Also, connecting up the main Danforth, we could have a surface relief line, which it's partly in there with the Smart Track RER thing, but why aren't we doing more of that? That's what's really kind of needed to, like, come on, let's really focus on things. So we also have to be thinking, quite honestly, with the numbers of people that are on the subways, the public transit should actually have a greater claim to the surface priority on Bloor, Danforth, on Yonge Street, instead of having the relatively feeble capacity of people in cars, especially in the lower core, which has tight streets. It's very difficult, although they have to be considered for their function as places and how to keep the businesses and functioning, etc. Briefly, since it's time scuds here, motions to ponder and proceed with here, I believe, are given the crisis in subway transit, a development limit to existing allowable density, except for co-op and affordable housing, that occur in the immediate areas of the subway until significant relief measures exist. No, another motion, no further consideration be given to any extension of either existing subway line. It's just at the point of breaking, don't make it worse. Another motion, surface options to diversify access shall be developed, including reuse of existing highways and other linear corridors. That gets to this thing. The Don Valley Parkway could have a reversible busway on it, perhaps. Adjacent to the Don Valley Parkway, there's the rail corridor that's owned by the Metrolinx that goes up to the Brickworks. Can we actually manage to push something up to the Don Mills Road area, connect up with the Gatineau corridor, or tunnel through to Bayview, but start with making the Thorncliffe area, Thorncliffe Park area more accessible, because yeah, we just have to develop these options instead of putting all the eggs in one basket out in the far eastern end, even though Scarborough needs transit for sure. Priority be given, improving main Danforth linkages between systems be a priority improvement. With all the talk about Smart Track and RER, why isn't this connection here actually done, improved where main and Danforth? Why hasn't that been made better now? That seems rather strange. Bus 141 shall immediately become a single fare payment instead of the double express fare, and possibly other tweaks as you see fit. And that the city asks the TTC asks the city as immediately as possible to improve biking conditions all along the Bloor-Danforth with a focus on immediate change on Bloor Street East between Sherbourne and Church Street. And in case of any roadworks there, a priority of continuity for safe cycling in any constructions. Bloor-Danforth is a logical place for cycling, has been for 25 years ago. In London, England, they managed to squeeze about 10%, had a load reduction of about 10% on one important route, and we should be doing that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions? No, there are no questions. Thank you for coming. Thanks for your presentation. Next on our list is Joseph Katz, or Katz. Welcome, thanks for joining us. You do have 5 minutes, and once you have your AV set up there, we'll get you started.
We don't need this. To start?
Yep. Please do. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Joseph Katz, and I want to submit on the young subway congestion. Can you go forward? The problem is that the young subway is the oldest, busiest, and most complained about of the 4 TTC rapid transit lines. It is suffering from crushing loads with overcrowding and congestion, and during the morning peak hour, nearly every southbound train is loaded beyond its rated capacity of 1,100 riders. Trains are loaded with up to 1,500 riders, up to 36% over capacity. It's a source of complaints and negative press. Here's a typical one. The neglect of the TTC has been a tradition for as long as I've been alive. In recent years, we've sunk piles of cash into Shepherd and Spadina Extension, both of which have relatively poor ridership prospects, instead of building anything to relieve pressure from the young line. Carry on. To solve young subway congestion, You need to relieve up to 50,000 daily commuters from excessive, painful crowding. This would support downtown business and vitality of Toronto, which are negatively impacted by this congestion. A simple solution exists that only involves operational changes. No massive construction, complex software, years of development. You need to add just about 5 more or so AM peak hour trains to the current 61 trains to run 66 or more regular trains during the weekday AM peak hour. The January 2008 service summary states that currently TTC is running 61 trains at a 2-minute 21-second headway. Now, the TTC has sufficient number of idle trains to do what we propose now. TTC has run this number of trains in the past. There's no good reason why TTC could not do so again. This would increase capacity to above current demand. As you can see, in the past, in 2007, 2008, TTC ran up to 27 trains per peak hour, but more recently it ran only an average of about 23 trains per peak hour. With 23 trains per hour during AM peak, capacity is 10.2% below demand, resulting in severe congestion. With 27 trains per hour during the morning peak, capacity is 5.5% above demand. This represents an increase in capacity over 15% of demand and takes capacity from an insufficient level to a sufficient level. The first project would be implemented in the first 4 weeks. It would be planning and preparations. There would be a rider count on every train every Wednesday from 7:30 to 9:30 to establish base data. And week 5, you would add just 1 more regular train to the previous 61 trains to run 62 regular trains. And then you would add 1 more regular train to the previous 63, and you would continue this process for about 5 weeks to run 66 peak hour trains. These are additional steps to reduce the large day-to-day variation of trains per hour. I won't detail them. You need to monitor the performance, which means counting the riders on every train every Wednesday from 7:30 to 9:30 to measure the impact of the additional trains on the number of peak hour trains and rider volumes on these trains. The expected results are that the rider volumes were reduced from 1,224 riders per train, which is 11.3% above train capacity, to 1,043 riders, which is 5.2% below train capacity. I have a record of solving billion-dollar transportation problems. I won't detail them here. You have them on the slide. A comment from a former CEO of TTC in June 2016. A slightly longer version is that we ended up having a 15-minute conversation where he railed against the incompetence of the TTC, saying that the solution to the congestion of the Young Line is very simple: run more trains. He went on and on about how the solution isn't an engineering one, it's not complicated, it's just to run more train, which is a management issue. He said he's already told TTC and the press many times about this. National Post speaks to the economic cost of congestion, which up to $2 billion. Next.
If you could please wrap up.
The
We're at
Huffington
5,
Post
almost at
says
6 minutes.
that the young subway carries 34% fewer passengers than its design capacity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for our presenter? No, there are no questions. Thanks for your presentation. Thank you for coming. Next on our list is Fred Weiningust.
Pardon?
Very well done.
And just as we get set up here, next after will be Sheila Pisey Allen. So you're on deck. I'll start your time. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chairman Cole. My name is Fred Weingast. Thank you for the time and the opportunity. First of all, I want to open my remarks by congratulating Toronto on reaching the Amazon shortlist of 20 finalists and being the only Canadian city. Let's work together to make sure that we bring those jobs to the city and make sure that we have the right transportation there to support the jobs that hopefully Amazon represents. I also want to report personal experience today that running from York University to Osgood, using the subway, leaving at 12:12, I arrived here at Osgood at 12:45. The promise of 12:48. The promise of 36 minutes was kept. I would like to ask if everyone who has received the earlier report, Managing Crowding on Line 1 University, can please refer to that report, because I'm going to be referring to specific page numbers and requesting clarification on certain facts that have been stated. They may not be in any particular page order, but I think that it will help just to have that with you as you go through. Okay, first of all, I would like to question, the capacity on page 3, where we currently have a state of 28,000 passengers per hour stated by the TTC. We've also seen numbers around 36,000 by Metrolinx. Why is there a difference? Page 4, Toronto Rocket Trains. There's a claim of a 10% additional scheduled capacity to Mr. Joseph's Katz's remarks. I think that's also a question of capacity and engineering. Have we actually achieved the 10% increase just by changing trains? Pages 6 and 7, also to Joseph's comments on automatic train control. Today we are running at 141 seconds between trains, and that drives the 28,000 number. There is a claim that it will be reduced to 120 seconds by 2019, driving a number of capacity of 33,000. There's also a claim by Metrolinx that the capacity should actually be 36,000 after all the different things are implemented. Why the difference? Page 7, Line 2 traffic into Bloor. There's a claim of 22,000 westbound into Yonge. Can TTC staff please also provide the southbound Line 1 University Spadina side into St. George Station? What is that number, so we know how many people are hitting St. George from the north and from the west? On Line 2, traffic to St. George, 22,500 eastbound into St. George, again on page 7. Can we get a number that will tell us, the southbound line into St. George? What is that number? Line 2 traffic to Bloor is 22,000 westbound. So those two numbers are on page 7. Again, the request is southbound Line 1 from Finch down to Bloor. What is that number? Southbound Line 1 Vaughan Metropolitan Centre to St. George. What is that number? So we can have both of them together. Peak ridership, offload effect of the Toronto-York Region subway opening. There's a claim by TTC of a 5% impact that will be measured. There is a claim by Metrolinx of an 8% amount to be measured. What I would ask respectfully is that these lovely marketing brochures, which have been used to let us know what is changing from a bus route perspective, actually be used to provide real numbers, both from the YRT and the TTC working together to tell us what has been the impact of unplugging lines from Finch and Shepherd West and plugging them in at various different locations along the subway. Back to peak ridership at Bloor. Page 3, morning peak ridership is up by 10% since 2001, 3-hour morning peak up by 20%. How much is attributable to traffic being brought in from York Region from the Finch terminal, distinct from the Finch bus station, which is a TTC bus station? Fare strategies. You talk about a Line 1 offload effect of the double discounted fare with GO, or that really wasn't well discussed. As you know, right now, TTC to GO is promoting $1.50. YRT to GO is promoting $1. We've actually figured out that if you go YRT to GO to TTC, you are actually getting $2.50 as by that double discounted fare. And if you have to go directly YRT to TTC and cross Steeles Avenue, you're paying $6.63. Just want to make sure the TTC staff and YRT staff have gone through all scenarios and look at that as how fare strategies could reduce impact on Line 1. Adding buses to Yonge Street. You already know how to deal with shuttle buses, and London, England is a perfect example of buses running on top of subways. If you already know how to do that, would you consider running Yonge Street 2 lanes southbound with shuttle buses running during those peak rush hours in the morning and northbound? So if the subway breaks down for whatever reason, you've already got the buses there, and if it doesn't break down, you could at least have the buses helping alleviate the traffic until you got to Bloor or possibly Rosedale to avoid the problems there. Parking strategies were never mentioned as a way to drive down usage of Line 1 or move it over to Line 2. You have four different parking structures: free, $5, $7, and $12. I would appreciate if staff would at least, together with the YRT staff, come up with the strategy of how to drive people to the west versus how to drive people to the east, and leverage as well the GO Transit. Growth on Line 1 north of Bloor, 10-minute walking. You've given a number of 50,000 Bloor to Finch. However, you do not count Finch to Steeles, which would be a TTC responsibility, and Steeles to Richmond Hill YRT, because that is pouring in the numbers from the north. You should have that included as part of your strategy. And finally, trips per Line 1 Yonge side, you claim 450,000. We do have a number from YRT claiming somewhere between 13,000 one-way, 26,000 two-way, but we don't have finally how many are coming in from Finch Terminal and how many are going to Finch Station.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions? No questions. Thank you for your presentation. Our last speaker, I believe, is Sheila. I think she's here and ready.
Thank you.
Welcome, and I'll start your time.
So we all know that riders need relief on the Yonge line, and I'll just be really brief. We don't think that the measures proposed today are going to give relief to riders. We do commend you for proposing measures to relieve crowding. But you know, what we really need is the downtown relief line funded as soon as possible. First of all, we were disappointed that the proposed measures in this report do not include an expansion of express bus service on alternate routes into the downtown core. This has the potential to divert transit riders away from the overburdened Yonge line by providing new rapid transit options for riders across the city. We know that the ridership growth strategy is going before the board next week, and it could dramatically improve TTC service through measures such as express bus service, dedicated bus lanes, and a reduction in crowding standards. So we're looking forward to seeing that report, and we hope that aspects of it are funded this year to give riders the relief that they need. Finally, we have some concerns about one of the proposed measures to reduce crowding, which is congestion pricing. And we think that that could be good news for transit riders if it means a reduction in fares on the off-peak, but it would be really bad news if it means a fare hike. People can't afford another fare hike, and most people can't choose when they travel, and so we would recommend that you do not adopt that as a measure to alleviate crowding. So we gave out these overcrowding relief kits to riders this morning. They were very receptive to them because they need relief. Thanks for the measures that you've proposed, but we know that you agree that we need to fund the downtown relief line as soon as possible. So thank you.
Thank you. Questions? You've got one from Commissioner de Beermaker. No. Okay. So. Yeah, so we'll once we're done this, then we'll have questions of staff on the item. There's a question to the deputant from Commissioner de Beermaker.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for coming in today. When you've suggested alternative express buses to try to, I'll call it relieve Line 1, do you have specific routes in mind that you're putting forward?
I'm not today, but we know that wasn't in the recommendations in the report, and we were hoping that it would be.
Okay, and so at one level, I guess I'll say, would you agree that we all know the crowding, and the crowding is uncomfortable, and there might be people like you and I who might be getting on at Finch, for example, who might say, if there was an express bus, I'll get off there, or if I live 2 blocks to the east or west, I might take a Bayview bus or another bus.
so that I can avoid the discomfort of taking line 1, and that would be good for everybody. At least in theory, we would like to see that.
Yeah, we need, I think, express bus service across the city, and when you look at the proposed route of the relief line, that gives you some ideas of all the areas that would be served by it to reduce congestion.
Would you agree? I think most people, like I would say most of us in this council chambers would say, well, I'm always going to take the subway because even if I'm crowded and I have to wait and I miss a train and I have to get on a second or even the third train, it's still faster than a bus because a bus stops at every single stop and every single light. So
yeah, that's why we would.
Express bus might actually make it for me to say, you know what, maybe I won't get in the subway system because this is actually maybe not quite as fast, but pretty fast. Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Question for the deputant from Commissioner Campbell.
Where do you get on the subway?
I get on the subway close to the Yonge line.
Close.
Yeah.
So do you get on the Yonge line north of Bloor, or do you experience that?
I don't get on north of Bloor, no. Okay. But our group represents riders across the city, and people have been tweeting their photos at us of their commutes, and they're extremely overcrowded. You can visit our Twitter.
I know the line is very crowded, but I'm wondering why there's this sort of persistent belief that the downtown relief line will actually provide any relief for people coming down from Finch.
Oh yeah, so we aren't just calling for a downtown relief line, but a relief line that would go all the way up to Shepherd eventually.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You do have another question from Commissioner Campbell. Commissioner Mihevik.
We look the same, I know.
Well, just Campbell's on my mind.
I often confuse them.
I'm not the first person to say that.
Yeah. Yes. I'm just wondering, for TTC riders, you've often come here talking about fares. You've often come here talking about needing to expand the system. Is the fact that this card, and it's a very interesting card, I don't know if I'd be able to answer all the questions, but is overcrowding your number one issue? What are the top three? Is it one of three issues? Like, where is it in your thinking these days?
Well, we campaign for a world-class, affordable public transit system. In terms of the issues in front of the city budget and city council right now, we would like to see 2-hour transfers funded, the low-income pass, and better service to relieve overcrowding on 1/4 of surface routes.
Okay, so it looks like two of them are looking good. This one's maybe we have to see, do a little bit more homework. So this is the one that's outstanding for you folks.
Yeah, better service to relieve crowding. When riders contact us, that's one of their biggest complaints. And you can visit our social media pages and see some of the photos that people are submitting.
Great, thank you.
Other questions? I have one quick one. Just talking about express routes as a way to relieve overcrowding, and I don't know if you're aware, were you aware, or would you be encouraged to know that there's an extensive report passed by this board detailing express routes, ones that would roll out in the very immediate future and then many over the next few years across the city?
Are you referring to the ridership growth strategy? Or?
No, that this commission in the last few months passed a comprehensive strategy on express bus services, and that would call for express routes across the entirety of the city.
That's excellent.
Okay, so maybe not aware, but maybe if you were to check that out, it might align with what you're calling for express service to help out with Yonge. Other questions? Great, thank you very much for being here. Now we'll move on to the item itself, and there are questions of staff, starting with Commissioner Fragadakis, then Heisey.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chair. Okay, so through you, on page 7, it notes, oh, sorry. No, I'm asking. Okay. So staff are reviewing design options to help manage crowding at Bloor Yonge. So I was wondering when might we expect a report on that?
We would be expecting to report on that probably, or completing that work by the end of this year. So we would probably report out early next year.
So are there any sort of quick solutions that are being implemented or soon will be before that report comes forward? Because that's an awfully long time. Because I mean, I think we meet in July and then don't meet again till the new TTC board is constituted.
Right. What I can say in the potential short-term solutions really start to kick in with ATC, where you can start to control crowding better on the platform. You can demarcate the boarding and alighting spaces on the platform, and really a lot of, in the short term, a lot of very active crowd control measures. But into the medium and longer term, we're looking at, along with our other partners at Metrolinx and other transit agencies, various types of fare integration, and then we get into things that we can do structurally with the station at Bloor-Yonge, and potentially adding another platform at the lower level, expanding the mezzanine to control the crowding. Of course, we would have to do, we're still doing further work on that, but it's really coming down to what can you actively manage with what you have, and then what can you build, and what does that cost, and what is the business case.
So between now and the summer of this year, there are no quick solutions other than what you're already doing?
The quick solutions are really what we're laying out in this report today, and over the longer term, it's getting into more substantial capital projects.
Okay. So there's, on page 3, it says that the morning rush hour ridership on Line 1 has reached historical maximums of 28,000 to 30,000 passengers per hour southbound from Bloor Station. And then on page 7, the report advises that in 2020, the scheduled service interval improvements will mean an additional hourly capacity of about 33 passengers per hour. I was wondering if someone could walk us through those numbers.
Through the chair, I can walk you through the trains side of it in terms of capacity. Then I think I'd ask service.
So what I was looking at, it was like an apples to apples comparison of capacity now and a similar comparison in 2020.
Okay, so at the moment we schedule 25.5 trains an hour. That's a train every 141 seconds. Dr. Cates in his presentation alluded to varying degrees of achieving that. We've never changed the headline frequency of 141 seconds. I've been here almost 4 years, and what is clear is we are unable to deliver the scheduled capacity on a daily basis. So we've actually improved by about 3 trains an hour, and on a good average morning, we achieve a little bit either side of 24 trains an hour, but 25.5 advertised. So we lose capacity through late running and congestion. One of those congestion spots is Bloor. It's the worst spot on the line. And then obviously there are signalling constraints and constraints at terminuses. So the number of constraints which contribute to that 24 is not great. In 2020, we will have completed ATC end-to-end, and we will be able to achieve that 25.5 more robustly and do a better job than we do today. We will then increase that to 27, which will give us about 133-second headway, and then I will move it to 30 trains per hour by the end of 2020, which will give us 120-second headway, and then we really need to see what the true capacity of the line is in practice to see whether we can go above 30 and by how much.
Okay, so just to turn to figure 5, line 2, subway demand versus scheduled capacity. From what I've seen and heard...
Which page is this, Commissioner?
It is on page 8 of 10. So from what I've seen and heard, this figure 5 actually paints a somewhat rosy picture, because residents in my ward often watch full trains leave them behind at the station, and not just at Broadview. One of my staff used to live near Chester Station, and she says that occurred to her at least once a week. There were days 6 trains would go by, and it did not matter where you were on the platform. So this chart, though, is a scheduled capacity, not actual capacity. So I was just wondering, is there any way we could measure riders being left behind at stations due to overcapacity?
If we can answer that in 2 parts, and I'll pass it over to Jackie and Mark. The scheduled morning, which is where we have this, is also 2:21, 141 seconds between trains, and we average between 23 and 24 trains an hour on a good day. The service is fragile at the best of times because of the number of incidents we have. And so a lot of the overcrowding I think you refer to, which I experience because I come in from Castle Frank on a regular basis, is post an incident where it takes us a number of trains after an extended headway to clear the platforms.
And part two?
Right now, as far as the numbers we have from the passenger counts that we're doing, that's what's represented on page 8 in terms of what the loads are like. So line 2 is not at capacity based on the ridership counts that we have done so far and based on the schedules that we put out. But as Mike indicated just now, you do have operational issues that sometimes doesn't allow us to deliver the capacity as scheduled. So then you would do have passengers being left behind when a train comes into the station.
Okay, well, we're over 6.
Yeah, no,
so
I know. If we can ask another question later, I will. Thank you.
Vice Chair Heisey?
So it's my impression that the downtown relief line is kind of a holy grail for downtown transit activists. And I was wondering, because I have forgotten, have we developed a priority list of capital projects, sort of ranking them by importance to our organization? And if so, where does the downtown relief line fit? And if we haven't done that, should we do it? So somebody give me some feedback on that.
Through the chair, while we haven't done a formal ranking of the projects, we're working on them concurrently. And that's the Scarborough Subway Extension, the Relief Line South, and some work on the Youngest Subway Extension. Metrolinx is right now has carriage of the Relief Line North, but we're working actively with them as well. So in a short answer, we haven't prioritized them, but we're working on all of them at the same time.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Mihevc.
Yes, thank you for this report on managing crowding. The one piece that I thought was going to be mentioned, you know, at the end you say, okay, over the medium to long-term strategy line 1. The one piece that to me stood out, but it wasn't here, is platform edge doors. Now, you know, maybe I haven't been schooled appropriately in that area, but my understanding, if I remember right, and I think I do, is that you can achieve an efficiency of somewhere between 20 to 25% on a line, because you can zoom into the stations, you can zoom out of the stations, and that the cost, even at a cost of $500 million, that it is well worth the price, given that you have a $20-30 billion asset. And if you can improve the efficiency of a $20-30 billion asset through an investment of $500 million, that's a pretty good deal. Is it just that it wasn't missed, or is it, or is platform edge doors really linked to the John O'Grady school of this is really about suicide prevention, and therefore it's not considered as a strategy to overcome crowding?
I would suggest the latter, sir. I don't recognise your earlier figure. Under ATC, the train braking profile would be identical with or without platform edge doors. So I think in terms of speeding the run-in, I mean, clearly drivers driving manually, if they see a crowded platform, will sometimes slow down intuitively, which reduces capacity. But platform edge doors, if it was funded tomorrow, which it's not, is 10 years away plus, and the last estimate we had was about 24 million per station. So, and so I'm not sure in the short and medium term that platform edge doors are the silver bullet. I do agree with John around the current prevalence of priority 1 incidents on the line, but I would disconnect platform edge doors from ATC.
Sorry, it was in the medium to long-term strategy. I recognize it's not a short-term or medium-term strategy, but it's a long-term strategy. Do you not agree that it is a strategy to overcome, well, to be able to put more trains on the line?
I have to respectfully disagree with you in the sense that this is about capacity, and fundamentally it's getting to 27 and then to 30 and beyond 30, whatever that looks like. in my humble opinion, adding platform edge doors won't improve that. And at the end of the day, we just have to increase the number of trains. We have to increase the number of people we carry. There's some anecdotal evidence, and I commissioned platform edge doors in London on the Jubilee line extension, but actually platform edge doors can slow down boarding and alighting. It only makes alighting faster, but it's also a cultural aspect as well. And if you go to places like Hong Kong, for instance, customers behave impeccably around respecting the people getting on and off with or without platform edge doors. So there's a cultural element, but you cannot assume that installing platform edge doors will reduce dwell times.
They certainly would reduce paper on track incidents at track level in stations, though, wouldn't they?
I don't disagree. We've actually gone a long way. We've reduced the number of track fires around 60–70% since 2014 through picking up the litter. But the reason for platform edge doors actually is neither suicide prevention or litter. It's around tunnel and public area ventilation management and being able to provide a clean path there for people evacuating in an emergency. I completely accept the others a benefit, so.
Okay, I'll take more of this offline.
Great. Other questions? Commissioner De Laurentiis.
In the immediate term strategies, one of the strategies you might want to consider is engaging with the Board of Trade of Toronto. All of the major employers in downtown Toronto are members of have either a member on the board or they have a member on the committee. I know from having served on that board, they spend a lot of time talking about transportation and mitigating strategies for their staff. So I would encourage you to share the data in terms of crowding with them. Some of those employers have the capacity to change schedules for staff. So there could be, I'm not saying there'd be a huge amount of relief, but there could be a little relief there. But I think sharing the data with them would be really helpful to them, and they may come up with some ideas as well. So I offer that as a suggestion.
Great. Any other questions? Commissioner Campbell?
The acting CEO, is this arguably the worst part of the system or the most bunched part of the system, Yonge Street, from Finch on down?
I would say yes, and my time here and having ridden the system and watched what's going on, especially at Yonge and Bloor during the peak and rush hour, there's no...
So back last year in June, we discussed express bus routes, and I moved a motion to look at an express bus route down Yonge, which was defeated. And I don't understand why, if we were to run an express bus route from Finch down to all the way down, stopping at every subway stop with articulated buses, why the feeling was that people wouldn't gravitate to that. Better to be on a bus that's not crowded than to be underground in a subway that's jammed.
Through you, Chair. It's actually a route that I take quite often, either driving or taking the subway down. The difference in driving between Finch and Davis, the traffic congestion, especially right now with the Eglinton Crosstown work that's going on, it takes you twice as long as travel time.
So, sorry, I should have prefaced my remark. If there was an HOV lane, so in other words, a lane that only permits, transit and taxis. No, we have HOV lanes on the Queensway and Etobicoke. There's HOV lanes other parts of the city. But what if it was a rush hour HOV lane?
My background with bus rapid transit, it's a very successful mode of transportation. It would be very successful along that route.
Okay, that's my question.
Other questions? To speak, we have motions in front of us. We'll start with Commissioner Fragedakis, who will move her motion, and then I'm sure speak to the item.
So my motion, if the staff could put it up on the screen, is that this report be forwarded to the acting chief planner and ED for city planning and the city manager for consideration during the development application and planning approval processes along the Yonge Street corridor with respect to the capacity challenges that exist on Line 1. I'm a member of the Toronto and East York Community Council, and we get a lot of applications, and all of those applications point to that there's transit nearby, and that they can have all the density that they want because there's a subway right there. And I've argued for many, many years that we keep saying that, and perhaps some of these people need to get on the subway at Yonge and Bloor or try to get into the station, because it's nearly impossible, because there are times where people are just from the lower platform on line 2 trying to get to line 1. Sometimes the stairs are so jammed full of people that I don't have claustrophobia, but if I did, I'd be frightened for my life to be trapped in that station. So I think that we need to have a serious look at, or have planning have a serious look at these numbers. The system is not serving people south of Eglinton up to, at the very least, College, and that's like where a lot of this development is happening, and there's still a lot of pressure along that or near to that area, and I think it's a crisis. I think we're at a crisis. So I ask that this report be forwarded.
Thank you very much. Next on my speakers list is, I have motions here, so these motions aren't happening, Campbell and Mahavik? Yeah.
Or listen, I can just speak to it. It doesn't.
Yeah, why don't you do that?
So I guess my message as a commissioner of the TTC is that, our most important imperative is to move people quickly and, if possible, comfortably. The commission, for whatever reason, I know former CEO Mr. Byford didn't like the idea of a bus route down Yonge Street. Maybe I didn't mention or say at the time that it should be a dedicated HOV lane, but I think the commission needs to take steps not unlike what's been done on King Street. City planning went to drastic measures. They were, maybe not drastic measures. They did all the measures that they felt were necessary to move people along King Street, and we're not doing the same in regard to all of the people who are on line 1, and I think that we should do that. So the motion is on the screen to have us look at providing relief, and in fact, it was mentioned by, I think, one of the deputants today that, in London, one of the busiest transit systems in the world, they run buses, in conjunction with running subways along the same route. So I would just like us to look at it. I don't know if we can afford it right now. I don't know if it would be successful, but I think it's our job to provide, to give consideration to anything that's going to make things better for transit users.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you're citing the strong success of King Street as a reason to look at other similar pilots around the city. To speak, Commissioner Mahavik.
Thank you. I had thought that I was going to make a speech on platform edge doors, and I realize that there's probably more conversation that needs to happen around that, and maybe I need to be educated further. But I do remember a time when it was actually the TTC's position that staff's position, not the Commission's position, that platform edge doors could add capacity by increasing run times or lowering run times, and therefore allowing more vehicles onto the track. But that notwithstanding, if that isn't available, then frankly, I hate to say it, but I think where the action would be, if you really wanted to reduce the pressure in the peak hours, especially the morning peak hours, it's going to be fare strategies. That's my thing. Those users and those employers that might entice their employees to say start at 10 o'clock, not at 9 o'clock, or doctor's appointments rather than at 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock, have them at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock, so that people can maybe save a buck by going in the off-peak hours. That, to me, is the best strategy that I see in the ones in the medium to longer term that we could do.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other speakers? I will just quickly say, I agree with mostly what Commissioner Campbell and Mahavik had said. some of these things and strategies will start to flesh out more in the corporate plan that's coming. That's really kind of the foundation of which is the ridership growth strategy that's going to start to be rolled out. And so I think a lot of those improvements that we would see in the immediate term and over a longer term period will help. I think that as we look to express buses around the city, I think it's excellent that the TTC is doing that, and there'll be ones as early as next year introduced. And I'd love to see an express bus on Dufferin for how crowded that route is. I think that's something we're going to have to start looking at. And in fact, the great debate on King will tell us as a city how comfortable or ready we are to look at an express bus in a dedicated lane on Dufferin or Steeles or wherever that might be. And so maybe this is some good growing pains to get to that point. In terms of the Young Line specifically, the one topic, and I know there were some questions asked about it today, I think by Commissioner Fragedakis, that just does not get enough attention is the bottleneck at Young Bloor. And so we'll never be as sexy as any line that's south of Bloor or north of Bloor or in the east or in the west, any line on a map, but the capacity that could provide and the problems that could solve are so substantial and so important that we really, I think, as a commission, have to start harping on that more to get that into the consciousness of our councillor colleagues, our passengers, and anyone who's watching transit, because that is just such an essential piece of work. It's costly and one that we have to advance and really expedite so that we can start to see that relief that would bring to address that significant bottleneck that affects all of our passengers traveling both north and south on that Young Line. So I think with that, we have Commissioner Campbell's motion in front of us, recognizing as a package. Your time for you've missed your chance. As a package, all in favor? That carries. Item number 7, TTC service to Bluffers Park. Now on our list we have Councillor Paul Ainsley. Oh, there he is. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm not used to being at this side. I'll be brief. I was here last January. I'm just going to see if I can put this up on the screen. So I'm here about bus service to Bluffers Park. I was here last January asking for it. This park was created or built back in 1975. It's one of our highly used waterfront parks in Scarborough. The picture that you see on the screen is a car going down from Kingston Road down to Bluffers Park. It's at the bottom of the Scarborough Bluffs. The trip from Brimley Road, along Brimley Road from Kingston Road to the bottom of the Scarborough Bluffs is just over 2 kilometers. It's all downhill. It's quite steep. This is part of the roadway. There's no sidewalks on either side of it. And when I talk about the steepness, part of the road here, you'll see this little bit here with the yellow sign. That's actually an escape ramp for cars. So if you're going too fast and your brakes failed, there's a number of these spots as you go down the road. You're expected to take your vehicle, trucks, up that to escape. So if you can imagine pedestrians trying to go up and down that 2-kilometer roadway, biking is next to as impossible, as Councillor de Beermaker will attest to. It looks like there's a bike path or route on each side of the roadway. The road actually slopes off on each side into the ditches so that the water, when it rains, can get off the roadway. So there's not much of a bike route there. So my request when I was here last January was for some type of TTC service to go up and down the hill. So I'm here in support of the report. I'm quite happy to see that there's a pilot project being done. The Park and Recreation Department has agreed to step up to help make this feasible and assume part of the cost to enhance this service. I know it'll be very well used. The park facility at the bottom of the bluffs has 500 parking spots. The average attendance each day in this park, it's been estimated between 5,000 and 7,000 people. On many weekends, when the available parking space for automobiles is closed, the park is closed off completely. So I think this is an excellent opportunity for the TTC to enhance its service and provide a much needed benefit and access to the public, to the Scarborough waterfront. And I invite all of you to Bluffers Park this summer when the service is available and in use. And I look forward to a successful pilot project. As a city councillor from Eastern Scarborough that also shares part of the waterfront, I make sure that my residents all know about this service. They're part of the reason I was here last January. A lot of people in Eastern Scarborough were asking about enhanced access to the waterfront, and one of those was only getting to the bottom of it. There's very few access points to the Scarborough waterfront for people. One of these is, this is one of them, and not having any TTC access is a huge hindrance to people. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the councillor? Yeah? Well done.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah, you just tipped the scales. Okay, thank you. You're welcome to stick around to witness our lengthy deliberation on this.
The unanimous vote?
Let's hope so. Well, any questions of staff? Commissioner de Beermaker.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to, I guess, the appropriate staff. And I have to say that picture there looks so, Councillor Renzi, that picture looks so innocent and almost gentle. But it's, I'd say, at least a 100-meter drop, if not 150-meter drop as you go down that road. So my question to staff is, do we think our buses will make it up the hill without getting into trouble?
I hope so.
Yes, we do.
Otherwise, no point.
Okay, I want to be there when the first one goes up.
You're invited for this first trip.
Okay. Well, actually, I'll just watch. I don't want to be in it on the.
Oh, after Councillor Ainsley.
I'll watch and make sure it gets up safely the first time. My other question to staff is, if you know that area, as was mentioned, we have 5,000 people or more going there. There's 500 parking stalls, so the bottom is congested and moves slower than a line of ants. So if our bus makes it down to the bottom without going into the off-ramp, and people disembark safely, how are we going to be able to turn it around when there's like 150 cars just stopped as their parents and kids and grandparents get the hibachi out of the trunk and wait for other people to get out? Like it doesn't move down there.
Yeah, it's a great park. Lawrence, you can speak to your work with parks on that?
Sure. Through the chair, we worked very closely with Toronto Parks and Forestry and Recreation to understand the conditions, because one of our main concerns was the traffic congestion when the park is extremely busy. We are going to be working with them to develop a traffic management plan. They already have one in place for when the parking lots are full. They work with Toronto Police and Transportation Services to restrict any further vehicles going down and blocking the roadway. So we will definitely be part of that planning for this coming season as part of the implementation of the bus service.
And again, through you, Mr. Chair, on the map it shows that I guess the last bus stop at the southern end of the route, which I'm happy to see, but I want to make sure I understand. The bus would go right to the very, very last little parking lot that holds about 30, well, maybe 50 cars?
We are currently hoping to have the bus route terminate at the parking lot immediately adjacent to the beach. So that is the one at the furthest east part of Bluffers Park Road, where there is a parking lot for approximately 75 vehicles. We're working with Toronto Parks to ensure that we can have our buses turn around and that an accessible bus stop can be placed at the location where the pavilion is.
Okay, again, I can't imagine a bus being able to turn around there, so I will be thrilled if it can actually physically happen. So that would be wonderful. But those are my questions, yeah.
Thank you. Other questions from Commissioner Heisey, then Campbell?
So this relates to the off-peak loading standard we discussed in the CEO report. So we want to go to this, a new off-peak loading standard. And my question is, if we go to that off-peak loading standard, do we have enough equipment, enough buses to provide this service? So when would the new off-peak loading standard, if it was implemented, when would it come into play?
Well, you'd have to bring any new standard to the board, and as part of the ridership growth strategy, as Jackie explained, we'll be bringing back that issue.
So we have the equipment for this summer?
Yes, we do.
And then could you describe can you give me a range of subsidy that might be required per passenger to provide this service, and how that would compare to other bus services we provide throughout the city?
Yeah, I'll let Mark speak to specifics, but this is comparable to other summer service that we provide.
Right, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the range of subsidy ranges from a low end of $4.75 incremental cost per passenger, to if we have a higher ridership estimate of about $3.17. Compared to other weekend services on regular routes, low demand routes, we have routes that operate like the 120 Calvington at $3.18 per boarding, the 130 Middlefield in Scarborough, which is $4.38, and the 5 Avenue Road, which is $5.55. So it falls right in the range of other low demand routes.
What created those other low demand routes? What was the need we were addressing? Sorry, what were we addressing in those other low demand routes? We have a specific need here identified.
Coverage, to provide coverage to this, within the city of Toronto.
Okay, thanks.
And just to add to that.
Part of the network.
It is, absolutely.
Okay.
And in our service standards, we identify that we are supposed to provide about 90% of this coverage to the city of Toronto.
Okay.
Great. Commissioner Campbell.
So how many days in total are we expected to operate the service under this plan?
Just one summer.
Through the chair, we are hoping to launch service starting the weekend of May 13th and operate till Thanksgiving weekend. So that is approximately 18 weekends over the summer of 2018.
About 36 days.
30, well, holidays as well, so probably about 40 days in total.
So 36 days, and it's going to cost $187,000, which part is, well, I mean, it's parks as well as the TTC. And it's going to operate, how was it decided how were those times decided? Like, why all the way into October? Why not, if it's a pilot and we're testing it, why not just do the summer months?
Through the chair, this is consistent with other seasonal services that we have in Toronto, particularly the service we provide to other beaches, such as Cherry Beach, which we operate from May to October, as well as the seasonal service increase that we have with the 92 Woodbine South down to the beaches. So we figured this is the best way to have a consistent way of evaluating the success of this trial project.
So, well, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right decision. I mean, what are the carrying passenger loads in, for example, at the end of May and into October?
Through the chair, we've received a lot of, actually, it's an interesting question because the service down to Cherry Beach previously ended in September, and due to a number of customer complaints about ending that service in September, last fall we trialed an extension of that service into the October, until Thanksgiving. We are still analyzing those results, but preliminarily we do see that we had significant uptake. Also, as we know, our summer season sometimes lasts way into October and starts as early as May, and we do see a lot of customer demand for these services.
Okay, so it's going to operate, this bus is the proposal that it will operate 14 hours a day, and the maximum number of passengers is expected to be about 650 in a given day. How many buses will operate every hour?
Through the chair, we are hoping to operate the service roughly every 15 to 20 minutes, depending on the time of day. Of course, 15 minutes probably during the daytime, and then 20 minutes as we go into the evening period.
Okay, so every bus is going to carry about 10 people then, I guess, up there. That would be the rough calculation. Was there, on the other routes that you run, do you look at and do you have revenue data, do you look at revenue data by day and by night, and do you make changes to those routes? So I don't know that people, I mean, I think the proposal is to run it in, run it to 10 o'clock at night in October, and I don't know, how much sense that makes. Yeah, that's when the parties start, right, yeah.
The decision, through you, Mr. Chair, the decision to determine when we operate services based on the boardings per hour. If we find through the trial that minimum 10 boardings per hour are not met, we would remove that period of operation if the pilot is deemed successful and we move forward in the following year.
Could you make adjustments? Would you consider making adjustments, while, in the midst of the trial? If you find in September nobody's taking this bus, after 7 o'clock at night, are we going to continue to run buses till 10 o'clock for another 6 weeks?
We technically could cease service, but we could.
Okay, that's my questions.
Thank you. Other questions? To speak, Commissioner DeBearmaker.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll certainly move the staff recommendations and thank Councillor Ainsley for bringing this to the Commission's attention on a number of occasions over a number of years, and I'm very glad they're going to do this trial to see if this park out in Scarborough works as well as it does down in some of the other parks like Cherry Beach and High Park, and we'll see what happens. But certainly, when you look at the population of Scarborough, we have over 600,000 people living in that rectangle. We really only have 3 places to access the Scarborough waterfront. Only 3 where you can actually park your car within a reasonable walking distance. That's at the Rouge Marsh, which again may have a parking capacity of maybe 100, I would be surprised if it's at 200. Port Union Village actually has quite a large parking because we're sharing the GO Stations parking lot, and Bluffers Park with 500 parking stalls. But on any given day, as it says in the report, there are 5,000 to 6,500 people using that one beach, that one park on any day. So when you have 6,000 people trying to make their way into the park when there's only 500 parking stalls, it is chaos, it is congested, it is dangerous. Pretty much every single weekend in the summer, after about, well, it says here 11 o'clock, I'd say after sometimes 10 or 11 o'clock, or certainly by 12 noon, the police just come and park their cruisers at the top of the hill, and they stop people from going into the park because it's overcrowded, and we have our park staff sitting around in golf carts, again, trying to tell people not to come into the park. Well, you have thousands and thousands of people going into a one-way road into the park being stopped. They park everywhere, they park illegally, they block people's driveways, they park in people's backyards, they park on people's private property. We are now just going over to R.H. King Academy, now it's called, to put a parking lot up there and a shuttle back and forth to try to encourage people to park and then walk. But as Councillor Ainsley showed with the shoulders of that road, you have hundreds and hundreds of people, and I've been one of them, who can't get into the park. We park way up on Kingston Road, and you walk down, you just follow the herd of people, and you just walk down that road down to the bottom. It is extremely dangerous because people are within 1 foot of cars and motorcycles speeding past them. The roads are not, I'll call it the walkways are not flat, they're angled, not quite a 45-degree angle, but they're very steep. There's a couple of pinch points where you just say, what am I doing here? I'm going to get killed. So I actually think this will be a successful service because that park, instead of having 6,000 people in it a day, could have 12,000 people in a day. But it's physically impossible for the average family to get into that park. So if you've got your 3 kids and you've got some picnic basket and you've got a football to take with you, it's virtually impossible to get there. So if the bus allows people to get access to that park safer and a little bit more conveniently, I think it's going to be a very successful route. It may take time for us to advertise it, and I would encourage our staff, no one will take this bus unless they know it actually exists, because it hasn't for the 55 years that I've lived in Scarborough. So I think it's going to be a very successful project. I think we will see hundreds, if not thousands of people using that service, because there's literally no other way to get down unless you want to go for a 15-minute hike down the shoulder of a road that is, again, very unpleasant and very dangerous. And hundreds of people do it every single day on the weekends, but it's not something that we should encourage. I will be thrilled if our staff, and they've said to us, we're going to figure out a way to turn the bus around and get back up the hill, because when you're down there, you couldn't hardly turn around a smart car down there. So to turn around one of our big buses, I think will be a challenge. I'm sure the first few weeks, there'll be police officers probably just escorting that bus around the parking lot and out the driveways so that it can actually get out. But I think this is a very good service, and the 600,000 people in Scarborough might actually get a little bit more access to the waterfront. Not to mention some of our friends who might want to come and visit us from west of Victoria Park. They might find it easier to get to as well. Thank you.
We'll see. Commissioner Campbell, then I think Heisey identified first, then Campbell.
So I have a motion that you can put on the screen. So, you know, I'm a big supporter of transit in Scarborough, right? I mean, although for the most part. And, you know, I think it's ironic. We just had this discussion on the most crowded part of the system and how people are sandwiched into subway cars, you know, at all rush hour periods. And we're trying to figure out ways to provide relief. And we're looking at subsidizing passengers to the tune of $4 and $5 a ride, and buses are going to be running into a park, you know, in the evenings in the summertime, you know, carrying 4 or 5 passengers, you know, and maybe 15 passengers when it's busy. Anyhow, I'm all in agreement with giving it a go. I mean, I think providing access to the park is important. I think the TTC perhaps, you know, should give this, you know, a trial, but I would just say let's just try it in the summer months when the park is at its busiest point. So that's my motion, just to say, let's give it a go, try it for 8 weeks, see how that goes. If the demand holds up, if it proves to be worthwhile, then they can go forward in subsequent years.
Questions of the mover from, we've kind of gone, we went through that for quite a bit.
Question of the mover is, do you know whether I'm sympathetic to the idea of the motion. Do you know if it undercuts the trial period to reduce the service period because it doesn't give people long enough to familiarize themselves with the service? That would be my question.
Perhaps with the money saved from the subsidies we won't be issuing, we could put something into a marketing campaign.
Okay, so are you moving?
Listen, you know what?
I'm not being sarcastic. I don't know the answer.
I think you know what? It's not if it's running for 8 weeks, the TTC is good at communicating that the new services will be added. People will know it's being added. They'll see the buses, and hopefully they'll take it.
Okay, Commissioner de Beermaker, and then Min Wong and Mihevik.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So your motion reduces the service from, I'll call it the weekend before the May 2-4 weekend, to almost July 1st. So, I mean, I'm sure you know what happens on the May 2-4 weekend in Scarborough. That's when people like me take out their Speedos and go down to the beach.
Yeah. Like what subsidies are acceptable?
So don't you think, again, call it the May 2-4 weekend, that's when people flock down to that place by the thousands. You don't think we should have the bus service up and running for the May 2-4 weekend?
So in your remarks, you said we haven't had this bus route for 50 years. Yeah. This is starting it. See how it goes, and then that's basically my position. Give it a go, see it goes, and then in subsequent years you expand it, if necessary.
Okay. We go to Commissioner Min Wong.
Thank you. I probably should have asked Councillor de Beermaker this as well, but so this is a trial period. One would expect that in a trial period you're actually hoping for a certain outcome.
Yeah, what is it?
Like, so how many people should be taking the bus every day, every hour, during what times? So after whatever this trial period's over, we're going to get data back. So what is the baseline for saying, oh, this is great, let's continue on, or no, this is crappy, let's kill it?
That's a question for the commission after the data comes in.
Do you have any opinion on that?
Well, staff has indicated what the low point of ridership will be and what the high point of ridership will be. If it's successful in the 8 weeks it's running in the summer, then you look at expanding it beyond the shoulder season.
No, what does success look like?
Meeting their projections.
Well, I think success looks at the high end of the revenue forecast or of the passenger forecast.
Yeah, that's right.
650 people a day.
So you're saying, if in your mind, 650 people a day is something, if it doesn't meet that, then, you know, we should seriously say that this trial period was unsuccessful and we could discontinue this. Well, it would be discontinued automatically, but we shouldn't continue it.
That would be one measure to gauge it by.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Mihevc has a question of to speak. Okay, to speak, we'll start, the next speaker is Commissioner Mihevc.
Thank you. I would be very leery of this addition, this amendment. Lines take time to mature, to develop. And if you want to do an honest-to-goodness trial, I think staff answered the questions very articulately, that you start it when the others start that take passengers to the waterfront. If you want this to work, you have to compare like to like and give this line a chance to, it won't mature fully because sometimes they take years to mature, but to be able to compare like to like, so this one to the one that goes down Cherry Beach and some of the others as well, you need to start when they start and end when they start so that you are measuring the same. Do they have standards? Of course they have standards. That's the standard where you suggested a route in your ward, Councillor Campbell, maybe a year or so ago, and it didn't meet the standard, and they cut it, and we cut it as a commission. Do you remember that? If you may remember that, I certainly do. So I think you either do it or you don't do it. Don't half do it because you'll only get half a result, and then you're actually signaling failure before you even start.
Other speakers? Okay, so let's vote. So we will vote on Commissioner Campbell's amendment first. And so I believe that it is number 3 that he has changed the dates on. And he's changed those dates to commencing on June 30th and terminating Saturday, September 8th. All in favor of the amendment? 1, 2, opposed? That does not carry. The staff recommendation had been moved by Commissioner DeBearmaker. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you. No Speedos for anyone, any commissioners. Item number 10 is the Pioneer Village art installation where we did move something in camera. I'm not sure if there's anything else we have to do now. A motion from Commissioner Mihevc to adopt the actions taken in camera. All in favor? No opposed? That carries. A motion by Chair Cole to adjourn. All in favor? Recorded vote. Cole, Mihevc, Fragadakis, Campbell, Heisey, Min and Wong. Where did he come in? De Laurentiis, DeBearmaker. Yeah. And many thanks, and to, of course, Kristen Lillyman, who's been working with me for a couple of years and is moving on to greater opportunities. You will be missed, and we will still harass you. Thank you.